Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у щах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страны.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Хто води всяке озброєння, різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там пихцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to Day 64 of the news. And it's good to see you all once again. And today, we're hearing that the Russian forces were defeated in Vovchansk, and it's another major failure. And it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine, as we have gotten absolutely incredible news from the area of the Vovchansk front that Ukrainian forces have not only been able to destroy an exceptionally high number of Russian forces, but have also been able to retake the northern area of Hlyboke, meaning that Russian forces have now been completely moved outside of the city, according to reports that we're getting. We have also gotten the major news that there has been a massive oil fire within the area of Krasnodar due to a Ukrainian drone attack, slamming into a Lukoil oil facility and hitting it and causing considerable and severe damage once again to Russian oil infrastructure. Not only that, but we also got major news as well out of the area of Rostov-on-Don that blackouts are now going to be initiated across the entirety of the oblast due to Ukrainian drone attacks and the successes that they've had, and also the complete vulnerability that the entire region has due to a lack of Russian air defense. Not only that, we've also been able to hear that the Ukrainian Navy is wanting to put the Kerch Bridge as a priority target again for Ukrainian forces coming on into the near future, and we've also been able to get breaking news out of the area of Sevastopol that it appears as though they are starting to put bomb shelters into the city in preparations for further Ukrainian attacks. At the exact same time, we've been able to get major news out of the front lines that within the Bakhmut and Avdiivka regions, it seems as though the Russians are taking incredibly high losses and are making absolutely no frontline gains whatsoever. Only really taking frontline losses, and that's about it. But we have a massive amount of news to cover. It is an insanely high amount, and I cannot wait to get through it all with y'all all once again tonight. Before we get into it, though, I am going to say I'm going to be sounding not so high-pitched and not so excited, because right as soon as I started talking at the beginning of the stream, I got a really bad headache. So, with that, we're now going to be moving on into the breaking news of today, where we were able to hear that the Ukrainian armed forces have been able to retake the major city, well, really more so the major lynch point of Hlyboke. Not necessarily a major city by population size by any means, but a very important village in the area of the western controlled zone of the Vovchansk offensive for the Russian Federation's armed forces that are currently fighting within this area. At the moment, the front lines within this region look just about like this, and we can actually see that it appears that Deep State UA is already adjusting for the massive movement that Ukraine has been able to make forwards and north of Hlyboke. According to the information we have, Ukrainian forces have been able to conduct a lightning offensive right along the area of the Seversky Donets Reservoir, which is just to the west, and were able to move past Hlyboke, and currently Ukrainian forces are engaging and destroying the Russian Federation's armed forces within the northern region of Hlyboke itself. It seems as though that the Russian Federation will most likely be very pressed for options, and it does seem as though that that they will not be able to conduct a proper retreat out of the city, and will most likely have to begin a route through the open fields and towards the direction of Morakovets, as they may be surrounded by Ukrainian forces that have been able to conduct a lightning maneuver north and may be attempting to encircle their armed forces inside of the city. Moving on into the little bit of video that we got today, we actually got it from Madyar's Birds, showing the severe destruction that had been brought forward onto the Russian Federation's armed forces while the Ukrainians conducted this lightning offensive around the village of Hlyboke. And we can see them showing off here the destroyed and burning vehicles. We can see a multitude of Chinese ATVs and a large amount of Russian light vehicles. And incredibly high.
Madyar's out here with that car antenna once again, yucking it up.
Man, I'm telling you what, he really is. He'd be yucking it up. He going, but nevertheless, the reason why he's going is because the Russians have been destroyed quite seriously within this area, just in this offensive alone today. From what we understand, the road we were looking at, I believe it is, let me try and make sure that I'm correct in saying this, because it was a paved road, and I'm trying to find where this road would be. And it appears that it may actually be this road right here. I think it is. I think it's the road south of Hlyboke, where the Ukrainians have been engaging Russian forces. It looks as though the Russians were trying to still use the road and ended up taking incredibly high losses. One thing that's really interesting about the Russian forces that are inside of the region around Hlyboke, or the western axis of advance in the Vovchansk front, is that they aren't really equipped with any large numbers of infantry fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers, or tanks for that matter. We have seen that this force within this area has largely been equipped with light vehicles, such as UAZ 469s, also called the Buhanka. We've seen a large number of those, and we've also seen a large number of the Desert Cross UAVs, well, not UAVs, but UTVs, that have been used in great numbers by the Russian forces within this area to try and move around. From what we understand, these forces within this area may be described at best as light infantry, with a very small amount of motorized vehicles, all of them being completely unarmed and unarmored, and not only that, a very light amount of anti-tank and anti-air weaponry has been available to these Russian forces that have been within this area, and it is certainly starting to show, as the Ukrainians did make the announcement today. We are still awaiting confirmation on this. Deep State UA has not been able to corroborate it, and neither have we been able to completely, but they say that Ukraine has liberated the northern part of Hlyboke. When they're talking about the northern part of Hlyboke, they're actually talking about the small industrial area that is just north of the village of Hlyboke, which is really interesting because, funnily enough, the Deep State map does show that they control that area, but they do not show that the Ukrainians control about the northern half of the actual residential area of Hlyboke. Deep State currently shows that that is still being controlled by the Russian Federation's armed forces. And according to the information that we have on this channel, the Ukrainians control practically the entire residential area, the industrial area as of today, thanks to the lightning offensive conducted north of the city of Hlyboke, but they do not control the small little built-up area right here on the northeastern side of the town. From what we understand, the Russians have been able to hold that for quite some time, and video and picture evidence in the past that we've been able to piece together slowly on this channel has showed that for weeks now, Ukrainian forces have been within this area of northern Hlyboke, but the Russian Federation's armed forces have still been able to hold down, somehow, the northeastern side of the city of Hlyboke. We are assuming, based off of the information that we're getting off of this channel today, that the Russians may finally be moved out of the northeastern side of Hlyboke and pushed entirely out. This means that Russian infantry, considering that it is a light infantry force with really no armored vehicular support, they will most likely be retreating in a path out of this area, where these buildings are at the moment, straight into this tree line near the small lake, and then most likely walking the whole length of this tree line, kind of perpendicular to the Ukrainian front lines where they are currently, and then trying to make it to this area at the end of the tree line, and then maybe hopping over to the small tree line, and then bouncing their way through the tree lines until they get to Morkovets, which is the other built-up settlement within this area. However, that may end up being incredibly difficult, as Ukrainian drone forces will most likely be on the lookout for the small Russian detachment trying to make its way out of northeastern Hlyboke and back towards Morkovets to safety, and may attempt to knock out or destroy all of the retreating Russian forces before they can make it back to the lines. For the Ukrainian armed forces, this would be the best case scenario, meaning that they would be able to wipe out all of the Russian garrison in Hlyboke instead of having to fight them at a later date, at a later time, as a part of a larger Russian defensive further north and up in the area of Kharkiv. So going off of this, it does seem as though that right now, Ukrainian offensive efforts, especially around Hlyboke, appear to have been incredibly successful, and it looks as though that they're going to be keeping this going for quite some time. We would assume now, considering that Hlyboke is on a bit of a high ground area and is overlooking the fields heading to Strelecha, that the Ukrainians will use Hlyboke as a fire base, able to use ATGMs and also other kinds of longer range artillery systems like mortars or infantry mortars to be able to fire on Russian forces in between Hlyboke and Strelecha and help their forces to continue to advance all the way to the Russian anchor point at the border inside of the city of Strelecha. If the Ukrainians are able to continue their advance from the area of Hlyboke and into Strelecha and capture the town, that means that the Russians only have one anchor point left for this entire western axis of the offensive, which is the small village of Plina. Plina is not really in that great of a position. Right now, the Russians still control Lukoil, although Ukrainian forces have been incredibly close to the town of Lukoil multiple times and have engaged in heavy combat with Russian forces there. The Russians have still been able to hold it. Much like Hlyboke, Lukoil is also on a high point within this area and is situated a little bit on a gentle sloping hill. This means that either side that controls it gets a large arc of fire heading in the opposite direction, meaning that right now the Russians have the advantage, at least in the Lukoil area, as they're able to look out for a considerable distance and engage in fire upon advancing Ukrainian forces. If the Ukrainians take Lukoil, that means that the Ukrainians are in the exact same position and pretty much get a straight shot view all the way to Plina. That means that if the Ukrainians are able to continue forward and engage the Russians at Strelecha and are eventually able to take Lukoil, the only area that would be within solid, undeniable control of the Russian Federation at this point within this axis of the Vovchansk offensive would be the village of Plina itself. Morkovets and Krasnodar would most likely become completely untenable positions and would be abandoned by Russian forces or would be quickly destroyed by a Ukrainian offensive heading towards Strelecha or the Ukrainian forces that would now be stationed inside of Lukoil. So overall, it does appear that this frontline area is currently favoring the Ukrainian offensive at the moment, as the Russian defensive is now being put on the back foot quite severely over the past 24 hours. We are now going to be moving on from that little area, and we're also going to be moving on quickly across the border, because we got to see that a Russian resident living near the Vovchansk front on the Russian side of the border got to show us what life is like for an average Russian citizen that still lives there to this day. So I'll be showing y'all this video, and I'll also be reading the translation for y'all down here at the bottom of the screen. So comrades, we're entering into the village of Bezimino. Now I'll show you what's going on in our village. Here, let's see the sign at the exit of Bezimino. Let's go further. Only dogs left. Now I'll show you what's happening in our village, how we're being defended.
It looks a little run down out here, really.
It really does. And then he said, look, just dogs running around. A wasteland. A wasteland. A wasteland, a scorched village. Katyn pales in comparisons. Guys, Katyn pales in comparison. They burn 6 houses a day. No reaction from our side. This is the result of our fighting. People have been driven out of the villages. Only a few people are left here. Only one stove is left here. Look, like in Katyn. People lived here. Only dogs. You can't drive down the street. People released the dogs so they wouldn't starve to death. Now they're attacking people. Like that.
They're about to attack him.
There's no authority in the village and marauders are driving around. The police don't come to this. Do what I want. This is our authority. This is it. Look, what's happening? I'm driving down the street. There's no street. Everything is burning with a blue flame.
I don't know about that.
People are doing their best to put out the fires, but it's all useless.
I don't know if I'm going blind or something. I don't see any fires around here.
Me either. I was like, I don't know what he's talking about. Look what they're doing to us. Look. I'm demonstrating to you. There's no light. They save us gas. The transformer is destroyed. No light. Wait a minute. Is that what a Russian transformer looks like? Is this giant thing right here?
Damn, man. That's like, wait a minute. So that's like the same as the canister on our telephone poles here in the U.S.? That's their version of it?
I think so.
What the hell? That's like from the Stone Age, like back in Edison's day or something.
Dude, you drive up to this thing here, man, you hear that. Like, you know, like you come out of the Flintstones with this thing, man. I'm telling you. Look how many houses were burned today. They burned them without a punishment. I don't know who's them because he hasn't really described that clearly. The marauders, the Russians, or the Ukrainians. We haven't really gotten a clear picture of that yet, but we just know that people are catching the houses on fire and burning them down. They simply fly right over. Today were more than 20 drones. They're striking as if it's their home. Look what's happening. Another house is burning fresh. Now that one is on fire. Here, the windows are still intact, but this one is completely burned. That's how it is, comrades. Now I'll show you the next house is burning. Look what's happening here. It's destroyed. The fronton is hit. People are still here. Look. Man, you got real one just sitting out there on the park bench. Look, there's a person sitting, left without a home. Here, it's burning. The house is burning. People lived here. Now everything is destroyed.
Who is this filming, by the way? Is this a Russian?
This is a Russian.
Huh, he's like repeating the same thing over and over and over. I don't know, why is he filming this to show it again?
I don't know.
Huh, that's kind of weird. Like, that's weird he'd film this to show it.
I don't know, man. Like, I'm just here to show a video, man. But people lived here too. This one was spared. But it will be burned tomorrow. No, it was hit in the corner here. The drone is lying that hit it. The drone's on the ground going, I didn't hit it. It's lying. This is what happened to us. There's no roof here either. The house is burned. Look at what the house was. Only the walls are left. This is how we live. Our defenders are defending us. Here's how it is. Well, bye, guys. Thank you so much for saying like the same line 20 times while biking around in a destroyed town. But nevertheless, giving us an idea of what the Russian side of the Vovchansk front is looking like. And it doesn't look like the Russians are defending their own lands that well. The Liberation Mission seems to be liberating many Russians of their own homes so far in the war effort. But that is not the only thing we've seen happening that's been pretty wild over the past 24 hours. Moving on down and into the area of Krasnodar, we were able to see that there was a huge fire that started at a Lukoil facility after a Ukrainian attack. And here is the clip. Well, at least here's one of the clips.
Man, they still haven't invested in foam. That looks like water again.
It's water.
Что в Павловской
Bled, put the water on the bled.
приехали в 4 утра.
Man, the Russian fire department does like miracles for Ukraine when it comes to like saving like the whole burning down process. Like they just like fix it right up for the Ukrainians.
Man, they just like to make the fires even worse, really.
Толку никакого нет. Бахнуло так, вроде бы как потухло, все потом бахнуло опять так, что
This guy in the back's just a yapper.
и когда это все закончится, никто ничего не знает. Андрюха, Иван что-то кричит. Короче, вот такие у нас выходные дни сегодня происходят. Полная жопа, уже ни сил нет, ни хрена.
It looks like they maybe hit a tank, not the actual refinery itself, maybe.
Yeah, they did hit a tank, but from what we know, the entire tank farm was knocked out in the fire. Because we got a video a little bit later on showing the damage, and it looks like all of the tanks at the farm had sustained some pretty serious damage. We were able to see another clip of the fire right here. This was way earlier on when it actually got hit initially. And we can see the fire burning right there. Yeah, but
This guy must have been sleeping behind the train or something. He came wandering out from nowhere.
Dude, it was Hot Dog, man. He went, "Oh man, what the hell's going on? Oh man." And he came out and saw this.
Is that those chestnuts roasting on open fire that I've heard about?
Oh man, is that a freaking airplane ticket? Oh man. But anyways, that's the end of that clip right there, but still showing right after the attack when the fire originally began. And then we got to see the remnants after the fire had burned out. This is way after the fire had burned. It appears that it finally went out, not due to Russian firefighting efforts, but really just because it ran out of usable fuel. But here's the clip of the aftermath of the damage at the facility. It was pretty severe. And you can see that almost all of the tanks at the farm ended up sustaining some pretty serious damage. And we see Russian firefighters walking around in the remains of the massive facility that's largely been destroyed because of the fire.
They're not in that big of a hurry, really. Like the most casual walking firefighter I've ever seen.
Yeah, he's just kind of chilling, kind of walking around. Also, man, did you see someone in the chat say, "Is this live?" It's like, you're watching a live stream. Like, yeah.
He's like that rapper that went on that TV station and started like trying to rap. He's like, years ago they tried to, is this live?
Yeah. Yeah, dude.
He's like, oh damn.
Oh my lord, dude. I saw that comment. Usually I don't answer comments like that, but I saw that when I was like, what do you think, pal? You clicked on something that literally has a giant red button on it on YouTube that says live. Like, what would this not be? Like, it's obviously live. You know, like, you know what I mean? What's going on? I don't know. But anyways, moving on from that, we did get to see that the Ukrainian forces were able to hit the Krasnodar oil depot fairly significantly and cause a decent amount of damage. And it appears that the damage that's been caused inside the Russian Federation is really starting to stack up, because we got to see that within the Rostov-on-Don area, an announcement has been made that there will be blackouts going on every single night in the entire oblast. Russia media reports that the reason is a lack of capacity. And for 2 days now, residents have been complaining about the lack of electricity in various parts of Rostov. Traffic lights are not working, it is impossible to heat food, and turn on air conditioning at home. So now the Russians are saying that they're going to be introducing a blackout schedule to the oblast, but from what we understand, at least from additional information that I was able to find, it seems as though the blackouts are mostly going to be occurring during the nighttime hours, which would lead me to believe that it may not be due to a lack of capacity, per se. It may be more so for the fact that if they black out the entire oblast, it may be a little bit more difficult for Ukrainian drones to navigate, although most Ukrainian drones end up using GPS. However, due to Russian electronic warfare systems that have been able to jam GPS coordinate systems and GPS computers for quite some time, it may be possible that a blackout combined with electronic warfare efforts may be able to lead some Ukrainian drones off of their target and into something that may not be what their actual target is. Nevertheless, it does seem as though the Russians may be running into some kind of big issues in the background, whether it be that they're running out of electricity, which is really interesting in its own right, or if they're trying to stop Ukrainian drones from being able to hit their targets successfully. It does seem as though either way, they are starting to run into some fairly significant problems. And a lot of people have been saying that Ukraine has to be working on the grand strategy scale, because so many people, I mean, so many experts out there have started to say, it was a new kind of a comment that really took me off guard, because we have never said anything like this on this channel. I'm sure many of y'all have never heard anything like this. Big experts, big YouTube channels today are starting to say that the war cannot be won on the battlefield in Ukraine anymore, and it's going to be a war of attrition where one side has to win over the other economically. Now, I have never heard a comment like that anywhere, especially not on this channel. We haven't been saying that for about a good half year at this point. We've just been saying that just for the hell of it, but some really big experts out there are saying that that's what the case is going to be now, and it's truly going to be a full-on war of attrition. And a lot of people have been talking about the Ukrainians destroying another major oil refinery, or really that oil facility within Krasnodar today, and a lot of people are wondering, is that Ukraine's best chance for victory? Is this war of attrition or attritional war mindset of trying to knock out the Russian war effort more so than the Russian military itself? And a lot of people are saying that this is Ukraine's best chance of victory, trying to knock out these facilities. Others are saying that they really need both options, both destroying the Russians on the battlefield and also trying to destroy the Russians at the home front as well. A lot of others are saying that Ukraine really needs a battlefield victory, and some others are saying that they're a little bit unsure and undecided. But nevertheless, it seems like a lot of people have had a lot of different things to say about this. And I've got to say that it's very interesting here. And so, Matthew, what are people saying, and what are you thinking about it?
So it looks like 45% of the audience said, yes, this is Ukraine's best chance to win by knocking out the oil refineries, while 32% said they really need both options, and 16% said Ukraine really needs a battlefield victory. And on this one, I've actually said this for a while myself. I think Ukraine's best chance to win the war is to actually strike Russia in a secondary way. For example, taking out these refineries is one way to really hurt the Russian economy, which is really chopping at the root of the tree. In my mind, the way I see it, the war in Ukraine has come to somewhat of a stalemate. Ukraine's holding ground, and they're taking some ground here and there, but both sides are kind of locked in a fierce battle. While Russia sends men into the meat grinder, Ukraine keeps taking them out over and over and over, and that keeps repeating. So one way to break that cycle is to really chop at the tree's base, which is the Russian economic machine. If that can be knocked down, then I think Ukraine has a very high chance of winning the war very soon. But of course, there's a lot of work to be done, because while they're taking out refineries at a record pace, there are many more that have to be taken out before the entire oil industry comes collapsing down. So I'm with the 46%, but obviously if they get a battlefield victory plus an economic victory, that would be preferable. But the battlefield victory is going to be much harder than the economic victory. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that in my opinion, I believe that a war of attrition, or really more so a war against Russia's home front, would probably be a lot more successful than attempting to destroy the Russians decisively on the battlefield. The reality is that that's not really possible anymore. We've been saying that for quite some time now, for about 5 to 6 months, and for some reason, and I don't mean to bring any kind of heat, I just have a headache tonight, so I'm just kind of speaking a little bit more frankly, because I don't really have the ability mentally right now to try and say it in a more colorful or creative way. We've been saying that for about 6 months now, I've been saying that for about 6 months now, that the war cannot be won decisively on the battlefield. It has to be won through a war of attrition, trying to knock out Russia's war industry and vital resources. And we've been getting bucked on that by so many people for months now, because it's ridiculous. They have to win a tactical battlefield victory. They just have to. That's what they have to do. And so now other big YouTubers have decided that they're going to rip what we've been saying here on this channel and then put that out on their own channels as their own like original ideas today, after we've been saying that for 6 months. And now everyone wants to change their mindset, because a bigger YouTube channel said it, into now the war cannot be won decisively on the battlefield. Now it has to be a war of attrition. Not being salty, just saying facts. And I wish people would actually come up with their own original ideas instead of just taking ours and then making it sound like their own. But beyond that, One thing I will say is that it is a true idea. There isn't really a way for the Ukrainian armed forces to be able to win a decisive battlefield victory against the Russian Federation any longer. It's not really possible for the Russians to do that against Ukraine either. So both sides are having to shift into this idea of an attritional warfare mindset. And going off of that, it is far more important to destroy Russia's ability to wage war than it is for them to destroy the Russians' warfare abilities, like the Russian army itself. So if you had an option in between the Ukrainians prioritizing the Russian war industry or the Ukrainians prioritizing destroying the Russian army on the field, it would make a lot more sense to strike at the source of the Russian military's abilities, which are the oil refineries, the steel plants, the gunpowder factories, the ammunition and rifle plants, the vehicle, automotive assembly plants, things like that. Those kinds of facilities and those kinds of factories would be the priority to knock out and destroy. That would be the most important thing currently for the Ukrainian armed forces to do. The Russian Federation also understands that as well and knows that they have to do the exact same thing to Ukraine to be able to get an upper hand advantage on them, because the Russians can throw as much meat into the meat grinder that they'd wish at this point, and they can eventually move forward a little bit, because every day in the Avdiivka area they do move forward a minute amount every single day, but at the costs of hundreds of lives and not really inflicting that many losses on the Ukrainians for that kind of a victory. And they could keep that up as long as the Russian war industry is able to at least match and replenish the rate of losses that they're taking. The Russians could do that indefinitely for the large part. They could do that for maybe the next 5 years. But the problem is that they can't do that for the next 5 years, because Russian war industry in the background is getting destroyed so heavily, especially the petroleum side of things, that there isn't really a way to sustain warfare or conflict for that long. They just wouldn't be able to do it. So for that reason, the Russians are now trying to target the Ukrainian infrastructure and knock them out of the war beforehand. The fact of the matter is, and this is something that has been said time and time again, amateurs, and this is a quote I believe, I forgot who put out this quote, I think it was Pershing or it was Napoleon, someone correct me in the chat, but it was something along the lines of amateurs speak tactics, experts speak logistics. And that is something that I think is very important to remember in this modern war, is that it's not really about tactical victories on the battlefield. That's great for like a good thumbnail and a title for a video, but the reality is that that's not going to be doing anyone any good going forward into the future. There's just no way that you can try and succeed on the battlefield anymore and get a decisive victory like we saw back in the early 2020s. Back in the early 2020s, weirdly enough, that's an accurate statement now. In the areas like Kharkiv and Kherson, you just can't do that anymore. It's impossible. It's a complete stalemate out there. It is truly a par-on-par adversary situation at the moment in between Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine has quality, but Russia has numbers, and the two are balancing out each other right now, and we're seeing that there isn't really any kind of progress to be made on the battlefield. It is a stalemate. So you have to be able to try and find another way to break that stalemate. So it can't be broken on the battlefield. It will have to be broken behind the lines. So with Ukraine attacking these vital oil facilities, once again, the Russian military is running out of usable fuel, as well as the rest of the pretty much Russian Federation, both civilian and military. So going off of that, if they keep on going with this, they will be able to break the Russian army just on the oil side of things before long. And so I would say that that is a very good move by Ukraine, and that is certainly really one of the only ways that I think that they could win at this point. But let's see here.
And also real quick, I saw Nickelodeon surname saying the live chat. He said, to be honest, guys, the fact that Ukraine brought Russia to a stalemate is just unbelievable from where we were thinking in 2021. I'll be honest with you, Nickelodeon, I kind of disagree with that somewhat, because the fact that the West is supporting Ukraine so much, from the beginning, I knew this war was not going to be over in 3 days or anywhere close to that. I knew that in my own head, and many other people did as well. The experts didn't think that. They thought the war was going to be finished in a short time, because everybody was under the impression that Russia was a formidable force to be reckoned with. But with Western support, Ukraine can go on indefinitely. As long as that support keeps flowing to Ukraine, they'll always keep beating the Russians. The only risk is if the support gets pulled back or, minorly adjusted in the future, that could affect Ukraine's ability to fight the war. But as long as it stays high, they're good to go. It's not really that much of a shock to me.
I would say that that is true. It's really an impressive thing to say that the Ukrainians have been able to draw the Russians down to a stalemate pretty much on the front lines, because if we're talking about it from a realistic perspective, from what everyone was saying before the war, no one even expected that Ukraine would survive a week against the Russian army. And now we can see that 2.5 years later, they have ground the Russians down into a stalemate. And not only that, earlier on in the war, we saw that they were also able to conduct some major strategic victories in Kharkiv and also in Kherson as well. So going off of that, I would say that the Ukrainians have done incredibly well, but now we need to know where to go next. And that's something that I've been seeing a lot of people are not getting. Warfare is not something where you can have a two-dimensional mindset. Like, you can't go at the beginning of the war, oh wow, big battles, big booms, big explosions, really cool, let's keep doing it, even when it stops working. And right now, that has stopped working. Big booms, big wow, big deaths, it's not really changing that much, to be quite honest. What we need to do now is we need to start changing the way the war is fought. Because that's what war is a constant evolution of tactics and strategy to try and up your opponent one, and then at the same time, they're usually also updating and improving their tactics and strategies to try and up you one. That's how warfare has always worked. That's why warfare has gotten so technologically advanced just over the past 100 years, is because everyone is constantly trying to one-up and improve on the other and try and figure out a way to beat them. If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have modern technology in the military like we have right now. We would still be using bolt-action rifles and all other kinds of stuff, because what would the reason be to improve? We're not trying to up the other or beat them at all. So now we know, can't up them one, can't beat them on the battlefield. We can't do that anymore. So the one way that Ukraine can up them one and can beat them is by attacking their rear lines and attacking Russian war industry. That will be a great way going forward, and that is a path to Ukrainian victory. On top of that, another thing that makes that a lot more tenable for Ukraine to achieve and have a successful outcome with is that the Ukrainians get a large amount of Western support. And Western support is derived from Western industry, like in the United States. The Russians will never be able to directly fire a missile at Troy, Alabama, and blow up the Texas Instruments factory that is down there building the Javelin CLUs. They will never be able to do that. And for that reason, just in that one instance of that one factory alone, Western war industry is pretty much insulated and is integrated into what we would call the Ukrainian logistical framework. So for the large part, most of Ukraine's logistical framework is completely immune to Russian airstrikes and attacks, because it's not even inside of Ukraine. It's outside of Ukraine and inside of Western countries that have a massive shield protecting them in the form of NATO. So in the large part, as long as Ukraine keeps focusing on the attritional side of the war, Ukraine will end up winning, because Western support doesn't appear to be drying up or slowing down anytime here soon in the future. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And moving on from that little bit of news in the area of Rostov-on-Don and Krasnodar, we were also able to see that within the area of the Kerch Bridge today, the admiral, I believe, of the Ukrainian Navy, the commander of the Ukrainian Navy, I guess they don't have an admiral title in the Ukrainian Navy right now, maybe because it's not a big enough Navy, but nevertheless, the commander of the Ukrainian Navy said, and to liberate Crimea, the Kerch Bridge must be destroyed because this is an element of logistics, and all the military logistics of the Russians must be destroyed for victory. That was according to the commander of the Ukrainian Navy as a statement today, and it does seem as though that the Ukrainian Navy has made it fairly clear that their idea, or at least their opinion on the Kerch Bridge, is that that thing still needs to be blown up and it still needs to be destroyed. And a lot of people have been talking about that and wondering, is the bridge still a strategic target or not? And that's been actually a pretty big and pretty contentious question amongst many war analyst circles, is if the Kerch Bridge really is a strategic target anymore. From what we understand, the Russians have pretty much realized the vulnerability or the weakness of the Kerch Bridge as a logistical hub since day one. The bridge is a massive target. It is a 50-mile long bridge. Any segment of it can be hit and destroyed, meaning that it's completely knocked out while it's being repaired. That was known very early on in the war when the Ukrainians were able to manage that and knock out the bridge for some while. And so the Russians have been trying to find different ways to be able to get their supplies into the western area of Ukraine and inside of Crimea without using the Kerch Bridge. And they came up with two separate ways to do that. One, and the quickest and easiest, was to use the Kerch ferries. The Kerch Railroad ferries have already been knocked out. Many of y'all will know that, and we'll circle back around to that. But the Kerch Railroad ferries were a vital way to get Russian railroad logistics across the Kerch Strait without having to use the bridge. This meant that, for the large part, considering that the ferries were a lot more difficult to hit and were pretty much untouchable throughout most of the war, that the Russian Federation supply lines through the area were still incredibly short and incredibly efficient. while still not using the bridge, meaning that after the first and second strikes on the bridge that knocked out the bridge for some time, the Russian supply lines never really suffered any major faults or slowing downs in this area because most of the logistical efforts had already moved over into the railroad ferries. The second way that the Russians tried to deal with the Kerch Bridge vulnerability was by building a massive railway corridor through the southern land bridge inside of Ukraine and attempting to transport all of their railroad-based logistics. Most of the Russian army's logistics are railroad-based through the area of southern Ukraine. However, the issue with that is that they have to build the infrastructure, and that literally is almost going to be complete here probably within the next month. And not only that, another big drawback is that the route is much longer, meaning that it would take a larger number of trains, and not only that, it would also be a lot more cost prohibitive to do that in the long term compared to trying to cross the Kerch Strait. So, with this in mind, we know that the Russian railway corridor through the land bridge is almost complete, but it will not be complete here for the next month, meaning that that is currently not an option. And right now, the railroad ferries have also been knocked out as well for the large part, with only one operational, and all moorings on all ends also being wiped out as well, meaning that the railroad ferry really has no usable mooring to go to, the only existing one, to be able to conduct its operations, meaning that the railroad ferry is completely knocked out, and the land corridor still is not an option for the Russians yet. That means that the only way to transport supplies efficiently into the Crimean Peninsula, probably for the next month or a month and a half until that railway corridor is open on the land bridge, will be over the Kerch Bridge. And that means that for right now, for what we would know based off of this information and some pretty solid assumptions, the Kerch Bridge is a viable military target and is a strategic one. So going off of that, we're kind of getting an idea that that window could be fading. And so it's really bringing up the question, like we were saying, about the Ukrainian Navy's commander saying that the bridge is a target, should be destroyed. Is it really a strategic target that should be hit and destroyed, or is it not? And so, Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about the bridge and what its fate should be?
So it looks like 81% of the people, they agreed with the Ukrainians and said that the bridge is a strategic target right now, while 14% said, I say hit it regardless, and 3% said they disagreed with Ukraine and said that the bridge was not strategic. And from what I had heard last, I had heard that the Russians were using secondary means, like either the ferries or a land bridge or something like that, to get the supplies from Russia into Crimea, and the other way around as well. So we were told that the bridge really wasn't being used as a strategic roadway for the logistic supplies as of the last time I heard. However, even if it is or isn't being used, that is always a backup option for the Russians to use the Kerch Bridge, and for the logistics to be totally knocked out and for the Russians to have no way to get stuff to and from Crimea. I would say it's wise to go ahead and hit the bridge, and I would say whether or not it's being used or not, it is strategic. So I'm with the 81%. I say I agree with the Ukrainians and the bridge should be taken out. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that right now there's a very limited window where the bridge really is a strategic target, and I believe that it should be knocked out during that time to pose the largest issue possible for Russian logistical efforts. Like I was saying just a minute ago, the railroad ferry will probably be out for quite some time still. The railroad corridor will be constructed probably within the next month and will be operational, meaning that for now, for 1 month, the Kerch Bridge is the only way into Crimea and the only way to get in there to supply Russian forces. All of the Russian ground forces that are there, the Russian ground air defense forces, and the Russian Navy that is still operating in small form out of the area of Sebastopol. Going out of all of that, that means that if the Ukrainians could strike and destroy that bridge, right now is the moment. Because after a month, it will probably end up being completely unused for the remainder of the war again, much like it was for a little while earlier on. So it would be good to destroy it now, so that way, when it gets destroyed, instead of the Russians going, oh, well, that's fine, we can just move everything to the land bridge anyways, they'll be going, we have absolutely no way to move any supplies into the Crimean Peninsula or towards the Kherson area efficiently at the moment. And so that means when the railroad corridor is completed, these areas will be heavily undersupplied. That means that the rail corridor, which is now having to carry the entire weight of this region of Ukraine on its own, will be heavily overloaded with the amount of supplies that has to be moved into this area just to try and replenish your gift forces back up to the level that they were before the Kerch Bridge was knocked out. The Ukrainians could use that moment in time to be able to conduct a larger attacks, considering that these areas would be resource deficient and would be trying to fight to keep any kind of resources around, they could start to launch mass deep strikes into the area of Crimea, attempting to knock out Russian air defense sites, Russian air bases, and Russian naval assets, while they're desperately trying to find a way to bring supplies in so that way they can try and keep the air defense running, at least in a limited form. That also means that if they were able to expend the S-500 system incredibly quickly, that they would be able to make sure to maybe destroy the S-500 while it's there. It may end up running out of enough ammo, if it's even effective for that matter, that they could start to destroy some of the vital components of the S-500, such as its targeting and acquisition radars, and also its command centers as well. If it could do that, that means that they would be able to destroy the S-500, and that means that destroying the Kerch Bridge would have been a massive plus, looking into a big picture sort of a perspective. But with that, I would have to agree with...
Also, you got to admit, Enforcer, like it would be like one of the largest like propaganda victories for Ukraine if they actually successfully took out that bridge to where it could not be repaired very easily, and it took the Russians months to actually fix it. That would be the biggest victory they've ever had for like symbolism. I think the entire war probably. So just that alone is reason enough to hit it, in my opinion. I know that sounds a little not very strategic, but that really like sways on the mind of people a lot. Like, if people heard that the Kerch Bridge was knocked out, that would bring attention back to Ukraine, huge attention back to Ukraine. I think it would be well served if they were to do that.
I would agree. And sometimes military actions aren't taken with the idea of having a major strategic impact or actually changing the course of the war. Sometimes they're just done to either demoralize the population of the enemy or to try and improve the morale of your own. And I think that the best historical example that I could come up with for that is the Doolittle raid. Do you know what the Doolittle raid is, Matthew?
That's where they did very little, but they kind of won.
What?
Oh, shit, man, it's a joke.
Oh, I was about to be like, what? But the Doolittle raid, to bring up a historical example here, is a raid that was conducted by a Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle with a group of B-25 bombers that were completely stripped of practically everything, loaded up with some bombs, and they took off of an aircraft carrier near to the area of Japan, ended up bombing Tokyo, and then these B-25s, I think they flew on, most of them did, all the way to China, where they then ditched, and then they ended up pretty much just hanging out in China and joining resistance elements. But nevertheless, the Doolittle raids didn't really have that much strategic value or impact in the war, to be entirely honest. They really didn't do a lot to Tokyo, but one thing that they did do is that they demoralized the Japanese public in Tokyo a little bit, because it showed how completely non-existent Japanese air defense efforts were against the American raid on Tokyo. And not only that, it heavily moralized the American public, because they saw that America was immediately striking back, and not just striking back at anything, they were striking at the very capital of Japan, as in Tokyo, which was a big morale improvement inside the United States. And it came literally right off of the back of Pearl Harbor. So this was probably a fairly good move by the United States. Didn't really have that much of a big impact in the big picture in World War II, especially in the Pacific, but it really did a lot to improve the morale of the U.S. and also demoralize at least the Japanese public living inside of Tokyo. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, because like Matthew was saying, I have to agree with him. Every single military action doesn't have to have some kind of a strategic imperative behind it. Sometimes it can just be for morale improvement reasons, or morale degradation in the form of the enemy. But moving on from that and out of the area and on into the direction of Sevastopol, we got to see that after the attackums got shot down over the beach of Crimea, well, actually over the beach of Sevastopol, and ended up raining down debris on a whole bunch of people, it seems as though the Russians are starting to do a lot to help out with that, and they are starting to build these nice little well-painted bomb shelters, so that way they can put them down on the beach and they won't disrupt your beach-like atmosphere. So when the bombs fall, at least it looks nice and beach-like, you know, really resortish. But here's the clip of them showing off their painted up bomb bunkers.
Man, that's fantastic right there. So cheerful. So when you run into your like water coffin, you'll be okay.
Man, you know something I was just realizing? Didn't that look a lot like an American 18-wheeler right there? That looks...
It looks like a Volvo.
That is a Volvo.
What the hell? Now, wait a minute. They're bringing their bomb shelters on an American, or not an American really, more like a Swedish truck. They're bringing it there, but they hate the West. They wear NASA hoodies, but they hate the West. Make it make sense.
Hold up, man. I like... Yeah, Volvo might be Swedish, but I'm pretty sure that no European 18-wheeler looks like that.
Yeah, that's definitely not.
Let me go pull up Volvo 18-wheelers. Volvo 18-wheelers.
The ones in Europe will have the, like, you know, the flat front to the truck. The ones in America have this, like, cab style look right here. But it's a Volvo is Swedish, though, I believe.
They are Swedish. 1 second. Okay, so now let me scroll down. Okay, so now we're back. So let's take a look at this. So we have the VNL, we have this one, which is apparently electric, which is pretty interesting. Then you have the VNR, the VNX, the VHD.
These are some nice trucks, by the way. Man, these are nice.
The VAH, that's the auto loader one. But where in the world are there European models?
We'll probably have to go to the EU site.
Oh yeah, this is Volvo Trucks US. Let's see if we can find a European one. Maybe this is it. Reject. Okay. Yeah, here we go. Here is the European line of Volvo trucks that they have. They are completely different looking. So let's see if we can get all models. Take a look at them. Okay, so yeah, see, completely different design because Europe has different laws that make their pickup truck, well, not their pickup trucks, their 18-wheelers. Yeah, their semi-trucks look completely different. And it's due to length restrictions and all that crap. We don't have that in America, and that's why ours end up looking a little different. And also we have different requirements that are put out by the Department of Transportation for our semi-trucks. But nevertheless, completely different design. And if... Wait a minute, hang on.
Hey, there's a VNL. It's like the American version.
Huh. Wait a minute, do they have more of those? Actually, they do.
Huh, so they do have a few. I'll admit, though, like the FH, like the European-style ones, I kind of like those better than the American trucks, just being perfectly honest.
I'm not going to lie, I really like these too. I think they look pretty cool. Like, the American ones are not bad, though, but for some reason, the European ones just kind of look cooler to me. Like, I hate to say it, I think America took the L on that one a little bit. Hopefully, one day we can see a lot of 18-wheelers like this here in America, because that's what we call a semi-truck in America. We call it an 18-wheeler. But nevertheless... really cool to see. Really interesting to know. But nevertheless, they have one of those. And it just looks so American. I don't think anyone could disagree with that. But anyways, we can see them carting them out of Belgrade, apparently. And on their way down to Sevastopol, where they're now going to set them up. Hey kids, look, we got bomb shelters now. Don't y'all like that? I know I do.
Man. Thanks to good old Putin, everyone has to now have a bomb shelter on the beach. Not only are the sharks you got to worry about, now you got to worry about the bombs.
It's better than the white ones. That's all they have to say. It's like, well, it's better than the giant white concrete ones that they had. That still looks depressing, though. Also, another thing, really quickly, I like how they're talking to these kids. They're like, okay, kids, you know how we're all going to get bombed, right? Because we started this war. Well, we got this lion that's throwing it back up there on the stage, and we also got this bird which is whipping out the good Geschlick von Leichmann in Deutschen Volke, you know, a little thing over here. Like, I don't know what this scene is over here, but I ain't liking it. You know what I mean? I'm not digging it. But anyways, moving on from that, and out of the area of Sevastopol, I think we're getting the idea. They're starting to try and get into pretty much denial at this point of how badly things really are going. But moving on out of that bit of news and on up into our area of our location unknowns, we actually have a couple of interesting ones. But before we get into them, we have to address some of the questions because we've gotten some very interesting questions tonight. And Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so first up, we have a super chat from Babylonian who put in a $28 donation. And a huge shout out to Babylonian for that support to the channel and supporting our work as well. And Babylonian said, "Your Coquitlam, Canadian neighbor, and may Ukraine prevail and support get even stronger and end these tragedies, and cheers."
And thank you so much for the support, Babylonian. I completely agree with that as well. Hopefully Ukraine support does continue, and hopefully it'll continue to improve the situation of the Ukrainian armed forces currently in the war effort and the state of Ukraine as a whole, because things could be a little bit better. But still, at the moment, I would have to say I can't really wrap on the support too much because I think support is going about as quickly as it can at the moment, considering that we passed that $60 billion spending bill a little while ago. Of course, all of that eventually will be making its way into Ukraine. But still, thank you so much for the support, Babylonian, and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible, and we wouldn't be able to keep this thing running each and every night. And so with that, thank you greatly so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our second super chat of the night goes to David Henry, who puts in a $20 donation. A huge shout out to David as well. He said, do you guys think that Putin may be looking for a suitable off-ramp? Because Putin keeps screaming ceasefire, but if the G7 leaders, minus China, can get him to pull the car over and save face to his people.
And I thank you for his support, David Henry, and I'm not really sure if Putin is looking for an off-ramp, because he keeps on saying ceasefire, but he's almost laying out terms of surrender every time he does it, which is a more of a psychological operation than anything, more of a propaganda operation, because when he does that, this is how some people paint that here in the West. Ukraine hates peace. They love war. They love to kill their own people, and they want to kill everyone in the West. So they're never going to accept peace. But Putin is a wise and loving person who loves people and loves life. So he keeps on putting out peace offers, but those wicked Ukrainians keep turning it down because they're just so evil. That's how Putin is trying to paint a picture. And whenever you look into the fine print, you realize that the Ukrainians would never accept these offers because they're pretty much terms of surrender. So I would say, largely, I don't really think so, because the G7 really doesn't have a lot of impact on the Russians at the moment. And let me go pull up the G7 and show its members, so that way I can make sure to get this right as well. So let me go here, G7. So this is the G7. These are the members of the G7. So you have the United States, you have Canada, France, the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, and Japan. Those are the 7 members of the G7, and then everyone in light blue is a part of the European Union, and so they kind of get a bit of a say, but not really in the G7. But nevertheless, China probably would never, at the moment, tell the Russians to stop the war. They are probably fine with them digging themselves their own grave and hopping in it, as long as they get whatever they want at the end of the war. And they're getting exactly what they want right now. The G7 has already imposed massive sanctions on the Russian Federation, yet the war keeps on going. And so going off of that, I would say that it seems as though the Russians are pretty much dogged or stupid at this point, and regardless of the sanctions, regardless of the impact it's having on the Russian economy, and regardless how short of a lifespan they have left for this war, they're just going to keep on going, because otherwise, what else do they have? If they lose, they are already going to be screwed for the large part in the Russian mindset. So they're just going to try and keep on going regardless. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least in my opinion. And I got to thank you so much for the support, David Henry, and helping this channel to keep on running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible, and we wouldn't be able to keep this thing running. It is folks like you with your support that helps this channel to keep on being ad-free and sponsor-free for everyone watching. And I got to thank you greatly for that, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to be on air getting to talk about the news every single night. Although, I'll be entirely honest, this headache is absolutely killing me tonight. I'm sure many of y'all can tell, because I have not really been able to get my voice very high pitched, because that actually puts a lot of pressure on my vocal cords, on my throat, and really on my head, because it feels sometimes like the pressure of how hard and how fast I'm talking is going to make my head explode, so it would make my headache even worse. So I'm really sorry about that, but still, we are greatly appreciative of your support, David Henry, and everyone else tonight, and thank you so much once again for enjoying this channel enough to decide that it's worthwhile to support and help it to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the last question of the segment, and then we're going to be moving on into the remainder of the Frontline News.
And this one goes to James Alexander, who puts in a $10 donation, and huge shout out to James as well for that generous support. And also, I don't see a question attached to it, but huge shout out to James for keeping the work going, and we appreciate it very much. And Enforcer, what say you?
And a big shout out to James for that $10 super chat. We thank you greatly for the support. You didn't throw in a comment, but the support means a lot and helps us to keep this thing running. And so I got to say, thank you greatly for the support and helping this channel to keep on rolling, and thank you for enjoying it enough that you would support it and help it to be possible for us to run this thing day in and day out. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from the question segment and on into the location unknowns, where we got to see that a Russian foreign fighter surrendered and immediately began to crap talk Putin on request. So here's the clip.
Sri Lanka.
Говори, Путин хуйло.
Putin хуйло.
Четче, Путин хуйло.
Putin хуйло.
Молодец.
He's getting the hang
This
of
guy
it.
looks like he is out of his mind or something like that. Like, you can tell by that look in his eyes, like he doesn't even know what's going on right now.
Man, I'm telling you what, man. I personally feel a lot like that right now. But we also got to see that the Ukrainian Air Force was getting the job done while also destroying my eardrums. But here's the clip. Hang on one second. Let me make sure I got this correct. Let's see. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot. Let me add in the context. The Russians ended up attacking a Ukrainian airfield where they had planted decoys, and so this is the clip of the Russians hitting the decoys, and then the Ukrainian Air Force came out today and admitted that these were decoys. Hopefully we'll be able to get some more on-the-ground picture and video evidence to confirm the existence of the decoys, but this is showing the Russians going after and attacking the supposed decoy systems that the Ukrainians had laid out in the area. And with that,
What in the world's that?
I have no idea. I was trying to figure that out at the end. I was like, I don't know. I was like, I have no clue. But with that, very interesting to see the Russians attempting to destroy the decoys and the Ukrainian Air Force laughing at them for doing so. Meanwhile, we got to see a brand new cope cage. We have never seen one like this before in our lives. And with that, we're now going to be moving on from that little bit of news and on into our Russian casualty report, where we got to see that the Russians have been losing a pretty high number of soldiers over the past 24 hours.
Damn! 6 Bobcats? Good lord, man. These losses are crazy. The 6th of July is still looking ugly.
It's looking incredibly bad for the Russian armed forces, as 1,260 soldiers have been wounded and killed over the past 24 hours, along with 18 APCs, 76 supply trucks, 11 main battle tanks, 66 artillery pieces, 58 drones, 9 cruise missiles, and 6 Bobcat skid steers. All in all, it has been pretty impressive, and it is nice to see that the Ukrainian defensive efforts are continuing to inflict very high casualties onto the Russian armed forces. Moving on out of the location unknowns and on into our northeastern area, we got to see that the Russians were getting roasted out there today by Ukrainian drone forces. And here's the clip. And we're going to be muting that music, but we can see here the intro cards being thrown up. And they are really getting very interesting with these intro cards, very 90s-ish. But we can see the drone flying on in and hitting its first Russian, blowing them up on the spot. That almost looks like some sort of an ancient Gyeonsan bee, but they blew that thing up.
It looked like one of those German railguns for a second. I looked up and I was like, what the hell is that? I was like, is that a German railgun?
You know what? It looks like a World War I German field gun. Let me go see if I can just pull up a World War I field gun, get a picture of this thing. Let's see here. Let's see here. Let me see. 1 second. Hang on. I'm trying to find it. Yes. Yes. I see you know your judo well. Good one. But I gotta find this thing, man. Hang on. I gotta go through and look at every damn one of them. Because I said that thing looks wicked. Wicked weird. And I know I can find it if I look for it, man. I know I can. You know what? I found it, Matthew. Let me see if I can get it.
Let's see it.
I can't get it without the camo, but that thing from the top down looks a lot like it was this thing.
It kind of does, I'm not going to lie. This is, man, those wheels in this thing are like hideous, man. Like from just like a design standpoint, these are ugly.
They are, man. Like this thing is pretty bad off, but dude, this thing was actually pretty big. It was a 15 centimeter gun. This thing is like a battleship gun being moved around. Let me see if I can actually get a, let's see, a non-metric size for the round. Let's see.
What the hell is a kilometer?
Dude, I'm trying to see if I can find like the actual size of this thing in metrics. Let's see. So the caliber of the actual gun, it was about a 6-inch diameter round that this thing fired. So it was pretty freaking big.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this was one of the biggest artillery pieces used by the Germans, I believe, during World War I. But also these were used in World War II as well by the German army because, you know, they just never tell you this in school. But the German army in World War II wasn't really that advanced on the by and by. So these were actually used a fairly okay bit by the German army in World War II as well.
That's very interesting to see. I like the way they spelled cannon, too. They spelled it canon. Like Danone, like that French yogurt company.
Man, they went canone. Man, they're like, man, look at those big canones. but anyways, moving on from that. Hey, man, they wrote it, not me. But we can see that they hit that giant big canone on the ground. And now we can see them going for another one. And we see it toasting and roasting down there. And GW North said the U.S. Army went metric in the 60s. It's a damn shame, too. I'm just kidding. But we can see that little Russian vehicle continuing to burn. Oh, I thought that was something blowing up right there. That really took me by surprise. I was like, what the hell? And then I saw it was the effect. Oh, wait a minute. What's this? Uh-oh. Oh.
Oh, that's unsavory.
That is very unsavory. And look at that MTLB right there. Oh. Catch on fire? No? Catch on fire? No.
It's raw. Hey, look, the North Korean soldiers are back once again.
Man, they're about to start singing Where Are We Living Like in Those Days, man. Like that song I played for you before we went live. You know what I'm talking about?
Where are you, dear leader? Man, I'm not gonna lie though. That song, like, in my opinion, if you're like a dictator of a country and someone makes a song talking about "Where are you, dear leader," I'd be like, "I'm right here. What you got to say, man? What you mean? Where am I at?"
Man, it's like, what the hell do you mean? Where am I? Like, I'm always in your room. I by law, I have a portrait in your room of me. It's like, what the hell do you mean? But anyways, moving on from that and into our next clip, we got to see the Ukrainians conducting a little bit of a live fire mission with their T-64. Now, this video is 15 minutes long, so we will not be able to show the entire thing. We will just be able to show little bits and pieces of it. So here's the clip. We see the commander here closing their hatch as they go
And that
drive.
exhaust sound is just freaking beautiful.
Say what?
That exhaust sound is beautiful.
Oh, it's good. It really is. That hatch didn't close all the way. It's just kind of like semi-closed. That's why it's bobbing around like that. Nimi C, I believe. The headache could be from your wisdom teeth. I'm not the one with the wisdom teeth problems. That's Matthew.
me.
Yeah, that's Matthew.
Man, I don't have a headache, but I can't really feel half my jaw though. But it's all good. I kind of like the Russian. I'll be for long.
And I'll turn that down for a second. But I hate to tell y'all about like the headache stuff, but considering that I had talk pretty much non-stop on air, and y'all will probably be able to tell that I sound a lot more monotone. I don't want people, you know, like going, oh, is he depressed or something? No, I'm not depressed or anything. It's just that my head is like exploding right now on air, and I'm trying to make sure to keep this going. So I'm just very sorry for that, and I don't mean to say that to try and garner sympathy or anything. I just want to explain to y'all why I sound a little different. I don't sound that hyped or excited or anything, because I would be if it wasn't for the bad headache. But we can see them driving past this T-64BV that's sitting right there. Actually, we can see them turning, and now they're rotating the turret. We can see the commander now popping back out.
He's like a marmot looking out of a hole.
Yeah, it's like a meerkat, man. They pop out of that little cupola. Like, what's going on out here? Ingek said, you need a rest. I took a rest on the 4th of July, believe it or not. We only get like a few days off a year. I think it's like 4 days, maybe. We take 1 day off for the 4th of July. We take 1 day off for Thanksgiving. And then we take 2 days off for Christmas. So we only get 4 off days over the entire year. Beyond that, we're on every single day, except for Mondays. And the commander just walked off. He just quit. Oh, well, he's back. He's getting back in that thing.
And also, Nemesis is totally fine. They said, sorry, didn't mean to mix you up. It's perfectly fine, because we sound almost identical. Like, if you don't know our voices, like, verbatim, we sound pretty close, like, when we're talking. So we get confused quite a bit, especially in the videos. I'll see comments all the time when I make a video, and they'll say, great job, Enforcer, I want to see more. And then on Andrew's videos, they'll say, great job, Enforcer Matt, we want to see some more. I'm like, oh, man, I'm getting so mixed up.
Man, it's really hard to tell who's really like congratulating who for their work because everyone gets us all like both of us confused so much. But let's see here. Adam McLean said enforcers have a tough boss. Yeah, we do. Because I've just, I don't know. Like I'm like Matthew wants to take a vacation for his birthday coming up, and I already said if y'all do, I got to stay here because we got to keep running the show. So tough boss, yes. I can't even get free time for family. But we can.
Man, we all push ourselves hard, man. Even on vacations and everywhere else, I'm working nonstop, man. Every day.
Yeah, but you get vacations. No, I don't. It's like the best I get is a day trip. But we can see here the gunner moving around his cupola. That's what you're seeing over there on the right side of the screen. He's looking around. Actually, I'm sorry. That's the commander over there. This is actually the gunner. Looks like the gunner is doing... Go ahead.
Also, by the way, I see some people in the live just saying you have different mics. And that is true. That's probably why I sound different right now while I'm speaking. Because I literally switched mics just like 3 or 4 days ago. But before, we were mixed up all the time. So maybe it'll go away now. Maybe.
Maybe so. But let's see here. Dean London said, "Oh my God, that's kind of nuts. You have less days, less holidays given than to employees in America. We get 28 standard 20 days off here in the UK, unless you're self-employed like me, lol." Yeah, like that's something I believe is just kind of a thing. Like, like if you want off days, that's great. But me personally, I'm not really a big fan of off days, because this is my thing. It's not like I'm working for someone else and it's like their project and I'm just kind of there to get paid. Like, this is something I actually love doing, and so I'm not really a big fan of taking that many off days unless if we kind of just really have to. Like on big holidays like the 4th of July and Thanksgiving and Christmas, when really no one would be watching. And we see that they actually turned the engine off, so we're going to be skipping forward a little bit. And we see that now apparently they've gotten their fire mission and they're getting ready to fire. We can hear the autoloader loading inside the turret. And we see the hatch closing completely now. The gun's elevating. Any second now.
Huge thanks to Andy L for that support, by the way. Massive support.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, by the way, Andy L. That's massive.
Whoa, man. Jump scare.
All right. That actually sounded really good. And now we hear the autoloader doing his thing in the turret, getting the next round ready. We see them doing some minute adjustments to the turret. Now see them elevating the gun again. And now that you got the fine-tuning done, they're probably about to fire. Kid Rock said, "What kind of tank is that?" This is a T-64BV, which is a Soviet-era main battle tank used by the Ukrainian armed forces. We actually hear an explosion in the distance.
Every video you post is rubbish, both sides are losing.
How could both sides be losing? It's like one has to be like either holding ground, winning, or something. It can't be both.
Dude,
that's not
it.
even possible.
That's that goofy. Can we all just get along? Take, you know, like give him a damn Pepsi or something. You know, it's like, no, that's not how it works in real life. Sorry, but we see them firing.
Bro wants a participation. He doesn't realize that Russia's not getting it.
Oh my lord, both sides are losing. That's a really good one. I guess in World War II, both sides lost too, right? But we can see them continuing to do minor adjustments. We're actually going to cut the video here because we've been watching this now for like 10 minutes. But it's really just the rest of the fire support mission. If you want to see the rest of it, though, make sure to go down to the link in the description below for the map. Go click on it, and you can actually go and check out all of the little icons we have on the map and see all of the individual videos and clips that we have of every single incident going on the front lines every single day. Moving on to the Bakhmut, we got to see that the Russians got some brand new bulletproof vests and ended up getting wooden planks for Kevlar. Check it out. They open up the bulletproof vest, and it's literally 2x4s in there.
Oh man, it's balsa wood.
Я понял, это от деревянных пуль защищает.
Ну да,
These are wooden bullets, man.
я думаю, что такое легкое, блядь.
Твою мать.
You know that's got to be like the worst sinking feeling when your like military like suppliers give you this as your protection. That like seriously, these guys like are laughing right now, but you know inside they're like dying from this.
Man, yeah, I bet you they are, man. But hey, I think they're going to be dying on the outside here really soon too. But moving on from that, we got to see a Ukrainian armored car, a Kazakh, take a hit by an FPV drone and keep on trucking. Check it out.
Oh.
And they're still going.
That sounds like Jordan Peterson.
You see the dichotomy of the armor. It's such a strong armor. You know, something like that. But anyways, moving on from that and into our next clip, we got to see the 93rd targeting some Russian forces. Man, I wish I could do a Peterson voice impersonation because for some reason, you know, nowadays he starts crying every time he talks, and it's kind of funny.
You see, it's such a dichotomy. It's so sad. No, it really doesn't sound like him, but I'm trying my best. That's all that matters.
You see, there's a dichotomy or something like. I don't even know how he really talks.
Hard to imitate him. It's like real nasally, kind of like it sounds desperate. It's hard to imitate.
You know what the guy always sounds like he has a gun to his head. Like his tone of voice, it always sounds like he's about to be put down or something. He's like, "Please don't kill me." Like it's like why do you always talk like that? Like, you know, you could like it's kind of like how others talk in certain, like we talk in a certain way. I'm sure we can be made fun of too. But when you hear other people talk, you're always like, why in the world are people talking like that? You know, like. For example, Ben Shapiro, he always talks so fast, it's really hard to follow him, and he doesn't really get a lot out, although he's saying everything so fast. And it's like, what are you doing? Like a lot of people are like that. I don't know. We were like that too. I'm sure there's many different kinds of tics that y'all get when y'all hear us talking. You're like, yep, that's like an enforcerism. And y'all could make fun of it for sure, no doubt, just like we do with other people. But, you know, when you hear other people, you're always like, why in the world do they talk certain ways and say certain things? But with that, that's the end of that clip. And nice to see the 93rd targeting and knocking out Russian forces. Moving on from that, we also got to see that the Ukrainians were hitting more Russians in the area with drones. And someone said, Jordan Peterson is a good guy. Listen, when we make fun of someone, we're not making a comment on they suck or something. Like, I wish people would stop thinking that. Like, we just poke fun to poke fun. It doesn't mean that we hate someone or we dislike them. We're just making jokes.
Kind of like the comedian routine, you know, when they roast the hell out of somebody, they don't really hate the person or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, I don't know much about Jordan Peterson at all. I've seen him in some short clips, but that's about it. And just the way he talks is like very, very rememberable. You'll always remember that. You'll never forget it. And that's the only reason I mentioned it.
Yeah.
No hard feelings against the guy or anything. It's not like we hate him.
Yeah, you know, it's. I hate to sound like so exasperated answering that. It's just that every time we ever make a joke on this channel, there's always someone who's offended, like we hate them or hate whoever we're talking about or something. You know, like we'll joke on Detroit, and then people are from Detroit, and then they're like, "Hey, I'm from Detroit. I don't like you talking about my city. I'll remember that." And it's like, we're just kidding around. It's like we do that about where we live, and then we'll make fun of Birmingham, and then Birmingham people get in the chat, and then they want to complain. Like, there's always someone out there who complains about the jokes. Like, they're jokes. Just, you know, take them for what they are. But anyways, moving on from that and into our next clip, in the area, we were also able to see a little bit further down the lines and in the area of Avdiivka that the 109th TDF was in the Donetsk Oblast and took a couple of pictures. And they looked pretty cool.
Pick goes hard. Feel free to screenshot, share it with your friends, and share it with your family. Let them see it.
And share it with the fam. But nevertheless, really nice to see. And moving on from that and into the area of Vovchansk, we also got to see the 47th Brigade hitting some Russian forces. And check it out. And they're about to be hitting that thing. Oh my lord! What in the world?
You know when the Mad Horsey Brigade puts out a video, it's about to be a big bang.
Man, that's wild.
And this just ain't a theory, this is real life. Real life. Another one.
Dude, that whole building's gone, man. Like, that thing got leveled to the foundation, but still. But anyways, moving on from that and into our next clip, we also got to see a little bit further down the line towards Berdichi that the Ukrainians were dropping some bomblets on the Russians down E. Check it out. We see them lining up the bomblet, getting it ready to drop. They're now dropping it. And kabooey right on top. With sugar on top.
They're just letting us let it sink in.
Man, let that sink in. Let's in a literal sink. But we can see them dropping another bomblet right in front of a Russian. Oh, dang, look, there's a little crowd of them down there.
Let that shrapnel in.
Oh, they got one.
Oh. It was the stray.
It was literally the slowest guy in the group. He got it. But still, that's the end of the clip right there. They're now going to be moving on into their next little snippet. See a couple of Russians down there literally just lying down, I think taking a breather. They drop a grenade on top of them. And it gets them dead on.
Plot twist, this is the Russian commander who doesn't tolerate sleeping on the job, and he's dropping bombs on his own.
Man, he's trying to get them up and get them moving. Like, he's like, get going, damn it. And here goes another one. Dang, I guess these guys are going to be tardy here. But we can see them dropping some more bomblets on some other Russian soldiers in another position. Well, you see a couple of more out here just lying around. They're just doing their thing.
Oh. Matt got... Oh.
Also, by the way, really quickly, when we make fun of people that may be political, because I see someone taking the moment because we brought up Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro, they're now trying to vent their own opinions on them because they're political figures and they don't like their politics. That's not a moment to start talking politics. I'm so sorry to sound fed up about everything tonight. I'm not. It's just my head's hurting like hell, and I'm seeing things, and I'm like, come on, y'all. Like, you know, like like some of y'all have been around long enough. The like one or two people that I'm seeing doing this, y'all know better than that. But moving on from that and into the next clip, we got to see an FPV drone hitting some Russian SPGs. Check it out. And we can see the 2S1 Avdiivka down there on the move as they're lining up to strike it. And we see the drone circling around, getting ready to hit the target. And bada boom, bada bing, baby. Hit that thing dead on the nail. And we can see the drone flying around right here, trying to line up for a second hit on the already destroyed SPG. And we can see them now going after a small staff car trying to move through the trees as well. And that's the end of the clip, but still really nice to see them doing that work out there and making sure to knock out those Russian vehicles. Moving on from that and down in the area of Pisky, we also got to see the Sky Hunters dropping off some bomblets onto some Russians and making sure that they get their early Christmas presents. And we're going to be muting that. Sounds like you got some dubstep going on there. And we can see them here trying to track down the Russians in the tree line. And we can see them moving around right there, literally right below the drone. And we can see them dropping the bomblet. And it looks like they're trying to make a run for it, and that run for it did not work out that well. And we see them dropping another bomblet. And we can see they got that one a hole in one. Call him Tiger Woods, because that was pretty on the mark. We now see this Ukrainian drone going for a lone Russian in the field, and it looks like it just overshot a little bit, but still got him nonetheless. Pretty impressive stuff. We now see the FPV drone coming in and finishing off the job, and that's the end of the clip. But pretty nice to see the 65th Brigade is making sure to continue to hold down their area of the front line. Moving on from that and into the area of Novomikhailivka, we also got to see the 72nd Mechanized Brigade hitting Russian forces down here. And we see a Russian soldier out on the street, I believe. And he's running. Yep, there he is. And he's trying to run into the tree line here, but the Ukrainian drone is fast. The Russian might be fast, but the drone is a little bit faster, hitting him dead on the nail and knocking him out. And with that, that's the end of the clip, but really nice to see the 72nd Brigade doing its job. And with that, we're now going to be moving on out of that area and a little bit further on down the lines and into the direction of Vasilivka, where we got to see that a Ukrainian FPV drone was able to successfully intercept and take down a Zala drone. And we can see the drone here at an incredibly high altitude, and we can see the Zala right there, just a couple of pixels. Itty-bitty little pixels. And we can see the drone coming on in, trying to line itself up just right. And there's the Zala. It's continuing to get closer. And a dead-on hit, detonating right over the top of the Zala and knocking that thing out. Very nice to see and good to know. Moving on from that and even further on down the lines and into the area of Kherson, we were also able to see the 38th Marines attacking the Russian forces. Here's the clip. We can see here the already destroyed area that the Ukrainian drone is looking down on as it gets ready to target and destroy some Russian forces. And we can see them dropping a couple of bomblets. And we see them looking through the opening of a roof as they drop a bomblet almost right through. It looks like it blew up on the roof. It looks like they may have dropped a second bomblet or there's another drone waiting there. And we can now see that they're lining up some more bomblets on the Russians, it appears, at night. And we can see two Ukrainian drones actually dropping bomblets at the exact same time right here, working in unison, which is really rare to see. We see them continuing to drop bomblets. Over and over and over onto the Russian forces, and it looks like they're fairly accurate. And with that, that's the end of the clip, but really nice to see the Ukrainian 38th Marine Brigade doing its job. Moving on from that and further down the line, we also got to see that a Russian boat has a cope cage now, and it looks like the Russians are even starting to outfit their boats with cope cages, which is pretty cool. Pretty neat to see. Moving on from that, it's now time for us to move on up to Kyiv and cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 864 of the news of the war in Ukraine. And so, without further ado, here is the speech. And let me make sure it's on Ukrainian. And here we go.
Дорогі українці, українки, коротко про цей день і тиждень. Перше, я вдячний усім воїнам, які забезпечують удари наших українських дронів. Російська держава повинна відчувати відповідь на те, що вона робить проти нашої держави і людей. І зараз ця відповідь їй очевидна. Українські дрони – це вже глобальний бренд. Друге, працюємо над новою стратегією для нашої держави на морі. Українською морською стратегією. Незабаром ця стратегія буде затверджена на РНБО. Зараз триває фіналізація її пунктів. Чітко розуміємо, що війна змінила розстановку сил у всьому нашому Чорноморському регіоні, і російський флот в цій акваторії більше ніколи не домінуватиме. Ми закріплюємо наші інтереси, враховуємо нові технологічні можливості України та нові наші відносини з партнерами. Україна завжди тепер буде такою державою, яка здатна захищати власні інтереси на морі, транспортні артерії та інтереси наших союзників і партнерів. Я вдячний усім нашим людям, які це забезпечують. ВМС України, всі задіяні оборонні та безпекові структури і оборонна промисловість, державні та приватні компанії, які працюють заради української сили. Третє. Міжнародна комунікація. Цього тижня ми вже відчутно додали сили нашій ППО. Наступний тиждень буде часом продовження таких кроків. Щодня, детально з нашою командою, ми працюємо з партнерами над відповідними домовленостями. І в рамках коаліції ППО та F-16, і на двосторонній основі, зокрема, з Америкою. Готуємо результат, потрібний Україні та спільній нашій безпеці з партнерами. Ще одне. Сьогодні в Рівненській області, поблизу села Верхів, на жаль, сталася страшна аварія на дорозі. Вантажівка ударила мікроавтобус, багато людей було в ньому. І станом на цей час відомо про 14 загиблих, серед них одна дитина. Мої співчуття усім рідним та близьким. З'ясовуються всі обставини, як і чому це сталося, всі необхідні служби там, на місці. Як тільки буде більше подробиць, правоохоронці та обласна влада вийдуть в ЗМІ з усіма деталями. Слава Україні!
And the
Hero Slava.
And with that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 864 of the news of the war in Ukraine. And that moves us on into the second segment, where we get to talk to all of y'all. It's an incredibly fun segment, and we always enjoy getting to do it. But for reasons tonight of my headache, I think we're going to be trying to round this thing out a little bit sooner rather than later, because it is not getting any better, and a lot of people are like, why don't you just go get some headache medicine? If I did, I'd have to walk away from the stream, and that isn't really an option. So with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so moving on to the final question segment of the night, we have our questions and we also have our polls. And y'all know how much we love the polls, so we're jumping into this one right here, which says, do you think the Russian civilian population should be quote-unquote punished for Putin's actions in Ukraine? 38% said yes, the citizens are complicit, while 34% said no, the citizens don't have a choice, and 22% said it really depends on the person we're talking about. And on this one, me personally, I have nothing against the Russian civilians themselves. Obviously, if a Russian is out there promoting the war, I have a bone to pick with them, but the Russian civilians as a whole really don't have a choice in fighting the war or not, because Putin is a dictator. This is not a democracy inside of Russia, and if they speak up and speak out, there's a high risk that they might fall out of a window or get put in prison. So they really don't have an option here. So to me, I would say that the citizens are like every other country that's ever committed an atrocity. We shouldn't go hunting down civilians. And also, we shouldn't really start creating an environment where we're like, people say we hate all the Russians because the Russians aren't the ones doing this. It's Putin's regime which is pushing it forward. And of course, there are Russians out there that support the war, but that's another story. So me personally, I'm with the 34%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that I'm with the 34% as well. I don't really believe that any kind of action should be taken against the citizenry as a whole, because then we end up pretty much doing the exact same things that we've been deriding the Russians about for about 2.5 years. If we were to say that the Russian citizenry themselves were completely responsible, we start to get into a very gray area where we start to do questionable things possibly against the Russian citizenry, and we justify it by saying they're complicit, therefore they deserve what's coming to them. That's a lot like what the Germans said in World War II about certain groups in Eastern Europe saying, well, you know, they were kind of complicit, so they get what's coming to them, and then they ended up committing atrocities on that kind of a mindset. So I would generally say I'm not a big fan of treating citizens as complicit. They may be, but I don't believe that we should act on that kind of information or that kind of knowledge. That wouldn't be a good look, and that would end up going into a very questionable grounds as to what would start happening next. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so now moving from our one poll question that we had, we're now moving into our super chat segment, and our first one here of the last one is going to go to Andy L, who puts in a very generous $50 donation, and huge shout out to Andy for that very generous support. And I don't see a comment attached, but I do see a super sticker. It is the YouTube hippo, I think. It's jumping into a transformer gear of some sort, and it's also going berserk and yelling. So I love to see it. And Andy, thank you very much. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I gotta say, a huge thank you so much for the support, Andy L. It helps this channel to keep on running, and if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. And so I gotta thank you greatly once again for support. And while you didn't throw in a comment, the support does help us to keep this thing running and helps this channel to keep on being possible. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well, and we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Steve T, who puts in a $20 donation, and huge shout out to Steve as well for that generous support. He said, should the U.S. develop and test in Ukraine cheap, quick to build, easy to ship swarm drones? It seems like an automated swarm style attack or defend to overwhelm a zone is missing for larger single expensive cluster systems.
That is a very good question, actually. And I would say that those kinds of systems should be looked into and possibly developed, but we need to consider their larger their larger use in the rest of the world. For NATO, at least, outside the United States, it would be a fairly okay option, considering that they would most likely be dealing with the Russian Federation in a conventional war. Drone swarms of those kinds have been proven already to be fairly effective against the Russians, but automating that drone swarm and making it a lot easier to use and field would be a great technological advancement. However, for the United States, I just don't think that that would necessarily fit well within our mission scope. The problem is that the United States isn't just focusing on the Russian Federation. We are also focusing on an emerging China at the moment, which is starting to grow stronger and powerful with each passing year and is going to become a major adversary. So not only do we have to focus our warfighting doctrine on how to fight the Russians in the conventional war, we also have to focus our warfighting doctrines on how to fight against the Chinese in the conventional war. And going off of that, drone swarms may not be that effective in a U.S. doctrinal form because Chinese electronic warfare systems may be a lot more developed and a lot more mature than their Russian counterparts that Ukraine is currently going up against at the moment. So going off of that, I would say that generally for most nations in NATO, it probably would be a pretty good thing to invest in research in to try and see about making drone swarms a viable possibility on the battlefield. But for the United States, I don't think it would be a good path forward for the United States. I think that we should still try and find ways to make specialized drones, one drone to do one job, not in a swarm, just the one smaller drone, and also to try and find out ways either to make the drone swarm possible, either by improving our counter-electronic warfare technology, or something else along those lines. But I would have to generally say yes for most of NATO, but not really for the United States, considering that our warfighting future is looking very different than the rest of NATO. But with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. And I thank you so much once again for the support and asking a very interesting question about the future of drone warfare, because drones certainly are a major and emerging field in modern warfare, just like the machine gun and the airplane were in World War I, and just like missile technology started to become in World War II, along with jet aircraft technology. going off of that, we need to try and figure out a way, or at least start to put a lot of heads together and start butting them together on how in the world to improve drones and how to make them as viable, lethal, and effective on a modern battlefield as we possibly can. And there really isn't any bad options right now. It's really just a matter of coming up with the idea and trying to see if it works. And then if it does work, that's great. And if it doesn't work, well, then we need to go back to the drawing board and try and find out something better. But still, thank you so much for the support, Steve T. I hope that does address that well, and thank you for throwing in some incredible support, helping this channel to keep on running, and also throwing in a very interesting question as well. And so with that, thank you so much once again, and we are on to the next one.
And also, real quick, one thing we forgot to shout out tonight. I forgot to mention that the Bot Be Gone shirts are still on the store. We forgot to shout that out in the middle. It's on officialenforcerstore.com, and there it is, all in this glory, right there. The Bot Be Gone shirt, limited edition, with a cool artwork on it of a spray can of Bot Be Gone Extra Strength. Looks very cool. And also, it is, of course, made with 100% cotton. Very soft. It also fits very well as well. You can see right there on the model, who very generously put the t-shirt on just to show you. It's very well fitting. Nice collar on the shirt, and also nicely trimmed at the bottom. So, very nice shirts. I can attest to it. I've got a few myself, and it comes in several colors as well. But Enforcer, tell us more.
I gotta say, it is an incredibly nice t-shirt. I'm actually wearing an LSA shirt right now, but it's the same quality and the same kind of a source that we had for it. They're incredibly good. They are very, very nice, wildly comfortable, even after several washes. This LSA t-shirt has still kept its softness from the beginning. You can get these things in multiple colors too, and they will ship anywhere. Here's the United States page just to make sure that the price is $25 US like we say on the site. It's different per country though, because of course it's translated from currency to currency. But nevertheless, we have multiple different colors of this thing. We have it in black, we have it in sand, military green, dark heather, navy, and light pink. We also have this shirt in multiple different sizes, from small to 5XL. They are incredibly nice, and getting one of these will make sure to show your support to the channel, and also make sure that when you go in public, people will know that the bot ought to be gone. And also, another thing is that all of the profits made off of these t-shirts, 10% of them will go to United 24 and help out the Ukrainian war effort and help them in a little bit of a way. And so, with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And if you want to find one of these, they are $25 US a piece. You can go to officialenforcerstore.com. The link is in the description below. And if you click on that, you can go over here and get as many t-shirts as you want. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well, at least the best I can at the moment. And with that, we're now going to be moving on to the next one. Before we do, I actually saw this is a very interesting question, because I was like, that's actually kind of on point. Philip Fix's LSA said, wait, did Enforcer lose weight? Yes, I have. I've lost about 12 pounds over the past month and a half. So yes, I am losing weight at the moment. So the next time you see me on camera, the plan is I will look completely different. But with that, I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to Purple Gerbil, who puts in a $20 donation, and a huge shout out to you, Purple Gerbil, for that support as well. He said, do you think there will be another Russian revolution soon, and should NATO support it?
I don't think there's going to be really like a Russian revolution, like the Russian Civil War, ever again, because in a modern world, there are two things that have really died: full-blown civil wars in nuclear-powered nations or nuclear powers, and also full-on conventional conflicts in between nuclear powers, because nuclear weaponry has really started to limit a lot of what could have been done on a normal diplomatic plane a long time ago, or really on a normal political plane a long time ago. And so it's really hard to see full-blown civil wars or full-blown conflicts happen with anything involving a nuclear-powered nation. So with the Russian Federation, I would say that a revolution wouldn't really happen. What would happen, however, is a coup d'etat. That's kind of what happened with the collapse of the Soviet Union, especially with the overthrowing of Gorbachev at the end of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev was given an ultimatum that either he could step down and allow a new government to be brought in, which would start to dissolve the Soviet Union, or he could stay in power and then start a civil war. And Gorbachev decided, considering that the nation was nuclear armed and the civil war would devolve into both sides most likely seizing and using nuclear arms against the other, that it would be a lot better just to allow the coup to go forward and step down and get out of the way. And that's why a civil war did not happen during the collapse of the Soviet Union, and it kind of just peacefully fell apart. in the modern day, I think that would continue on the same way. Whoever is in charge right now, even Putin would realize that a civil war wouldn't really achieve anyone's aims, and him and everyone else inside of Russia would most likely die in a nuclear hellfire created by both sides or both factions of a civil war. So going off of that, I would have to say I don't believe that we're ever going to see a full-on Russian revolution. Now, we will see a coup d'etat, and then that moves the question into should NATO support a coup d'etat against the Russian Federation's government. I'm generally not one to support the direct meddling by NATO into the internal affairs of another country, at least overtly. Now, on a covert level, it's completely acceptable and is something that everyone's actively doing at the moment to each other. But on an open level of saying, okay, a coup d'etat is going and NATO is going to support this group, that isn't really a good thing, because if that group fails, now the Russian Federation's government has legitimate qualms or legitimate war claims to make against NATO and then begin a full-on conflict that we've been trying to avoid pretty much the entire time. So we wouldn't really want to give them that leverage, at least on a diplomatic level, to justify a conflict. So I would say I don't believe we should support a coup d'etat if it was to happen in the Russian Federation, at least in my personal opinion, because if it failed, then the fallout could be extremely disastrous. We would probably just want to sit by and see what happens. And then once things start to go full-blown, or we see that the coup is starting to become successful, give them a little bit of a push, but we don't want to give them a push that quickly and immediately come out to support anyone. Kind of like what happened with the Wagner coup. Everyone in the West just kind of idly watched by and waited to see what would happen with that. Would Prigozhin go all the way to Moscow and overthrow the government? And we all just wondered what would happen. We didn't openly come out and say, we support the Chernovak and Wagner. We just said, we're going to watch and see what they do. And we're not really going to do anything about it either way. Even if they overthrow the government, we're just going to sit by and let it happen. Because it's more of an internal issue than anything. So I hope that that does address that fairly well, Purple Gerbil, and gives a little bit of historical background, even just from the Ukraine war, to explain why I think that we should continue on with that kind of a stance. Because I think it's a fairly good one. And I think that it would make sure to avoid any potential fallout from a failed coup d'etat attempt that may go on. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support, and thank you for helping this channel to keep on running, Purple Gerbil. I love the name, by the way. That is a really funny name. And I thank you so much for enjoying this channel and supporting it, so that way we can keep this channel running. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one is going to go to John B. Rempel, who puts in a $20 donation, and huge shout out to John for that support. He said, keep up the good work, and take one from the chat. And LSA.
Hey, and we will make sure to keep up the good work. And I got to thank you so much for the support, John B. Rempel. You've been around here forever, and we will make sure to try and keep up the good work as best we can. I got to say, I am so sorry for all of y'all tonight. I have sounded very tired and very, probably exasperated. But the headache is horrendous. Like, I can't even describe this headache right now. I'm kind of wincing through the whole thing. So I've been wincing for about 2 hours straight now, ever since I've said the first word. I said, hello, everyone, I'm the Enforcer. And as soon as I got to the Enforcer, the headache literally hit me just full swing, like right then and there. And it has not stopped since. Don't know what's caused it. Some people are like, it's probably water. I've actually been drinking a lot of water lately. I think it may be a stress-induced headache. From things going on behind the scenes. It's nothing extreme or anything. It's just sometimes it stresses me out a good bit, and I try and deal with it as best I can, but it just starts to really get my blood pressure going, and I think that's what the headache comes from. But nevertheless, I do thank you so much for the support, because we try our best to get on here every single day and cover this news and get this out there to all of y'all. And while I do sound a little bit worn out today, I'm still so happy to be able to be on air and get to share with y'all all of the major breaking news that has happened just over the past 24 hours. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And thank you for being a longtime channel viewer and an old guard as well. And so with that, thank you so much once again. And we are on to the next one.
All right, in our next super chat, this one is going to Shady Hayes Gaming, who puts in a $20 donation. And huge shout out to Shady Hayes for that support. They said, take a question from the chat, and long live the LSA. And they put in an American flag, a Ukraine flag, and an Israeli flag, and they're saluting.
Hey, and thank you so much for the support. Shady Haze Gaming. And thank you for your 5th super chat ever to this channel. And we will make sure to take a question from the chat. And I like to see you're putting in all the flags. You're repping the set. America, Ukraine, and Israel. And we will make sure to get that live chat question in honor of Shady Haze Gaming. But before we do, long live the Lee Spring Army. And thank you so much for enjoying this channel so much and supporting it and helping it to keep on running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to keep this thing running. And we wouldn't be able to make sure to get you all the news each and every day. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and we're actually going to grab a live chat for not only Shady Haze Gaming, but also John B. Rempel as well, because we forgot that one. So we're going to grab 2. And the first one's going to go to Moto MC, who says, do you think the Australian slinger system will make a difference in Ukraine?
I feel like we've answered that question, I think, 4 times now, like twice over the past 2 days. We have seen the slinger system, but could we get another one, Matthew? Because I think we've answered that one so many times now over just the past 2 days. It would be a little redundant.
So this one goes to Wolfie Official, who says, have you seen the new Deep State map update?
We have. We actually were showing it tonight, and so the answer to that is yes, because we look at that map every night. So with that, I hope that does address that live chat fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Anthony Boer, who says, do you think that the Russians will be able to keep up with all the damage and losses of equipment and many people losses?
Not really. From what we're telling, they are starting to run out of a large number of armored vehicles and APCs. So for the large part, I would say they can't really keep this up. We've generally been working on a timetable on this channel that probably by the end of this year or the very beginning of next year, they're probably going to run out of equipment fairly quickly. So that's what we're assuming at the moment. And so with that, I hope we addressed that incredibly well. And thank you so much for the support, Shady Haze Gaming, and sponsoring that live chat so that way we can keep this channel running. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Richard Head, who puts in a 10 and says, why hasn't Ukraine been building cut and cover hardened shelters for the F-16 while they've been waiting for them? And I can actually tell you a little bit, Richard Head, on that. The Ukrainians haven't been building above ground shelters. We've been told they're building underground areas to put these jets in when they finally receive them. So that way the Russians can't even target it because it's underground. That's what we've been told, at least. And from the last I heard, that was about, I think, almost a month ago at this point. So, you know, they're probably well on the way to finishing those up. And it's probably the best thing, because I don't think putting them above ground is good, because that is going to be the #1 priority target for Russia. So putting them underground probably takes a ton of work to build that, but it's probably worth it. But Enforcer, what say you?
From what I understand, I've also been hearing the same thing. It's some kind of a subterranean kind of a complex. I'm not really sure how that's going to work, though, because I've also heard that they're going to be jumping them around from airfield to airfield. And then on top of that, I don't know how that's going to work for maintenance, because they're going to start racking up some flight hours on those aircraft really quickly, and things are going to start wearing down fairly fast as well. So I would say they have been working on them, from what I understand, not hardened above ground shelters, but underground shelters, and hopefully they will be getting that off of the ground sometime here in the future, and hopefully they'll just get F-16s at all, so that way it's all worthwhile. But still, with that, I hope that does address that well, and I thank you so much for the support in sponsoring that live chat question, because that was actually a really interesting one. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, huge shout out to Heather Fitzgibbon, LSA, who put in a $10 donation. And I did not see it comment, but huge shout out to Heather for that support, and we appreciate it very much. And also, huge shout out to B-Man as well, who put in a $5 donation. So, B-Man and Heather, we appreciate it very much. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I gotta thank y'all both, Heather Fitzgibbon and B-Man, for the support. Both of y'all are helping this channel to keep on running, and while y'all didn't throw in comments, the support does mean a lot and helps us to be able to make this channel possible. If it wasn't for folks like y'all, we wouldn't be able to be here every single day of the week, getting to cover this news and get to tell y'all everything going on around the world live on air. And so I gotta say thank you massively to all of y'all once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it wasn't for both of y'all, we wouldn't be able to be here tonight. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Dean London, who puts in a 10 and says, with love from the UK.
Hey, and thank you so much for the support and being one of our viewers from the United Kingdom. Really cool to hear. And I gotta say, thank you so much once again for the support, Dean London, and helping this channel to keep on running. And it's always cool to have our British viewers here with us every single night. I gotta say thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Destiny Edgington, who puts in a $10 donation. And thank you, Destiny, as well, for the support. I said, Enforcer Andrew, take a Tylenol for your headache.
And I thank you so much for the support, Destiny, and I would if I had the ability to. Because to be able to do that, I would have to be able to take an off moment on air, which is something that I have not been able to do tonight because the speech from Zelensky was too short. Usually we use the speech from Zelensky as an intermission. For some reason, there's a specific group of haters that act like we were disrespecting Zelensky because we do that. Truth is, we run a 2-hour show. Most people don't do that. Well, 2 hours straight of news, and by that point, we need to go to the restroom or get some water so that way we can keep on talking for another 2 hours or so. So we use the speech by Zelensky to be able to do all that, to be able to keep running the show for all of y'all very seamlessly, because we already hear Zelensky talk every single day, so why do I want to hear him again? You know, use that moment to go and make sure that we can keep running the show and get the news out to all of y'all, because this isn't really about us, like, you know, like worshiping Zelensky or anything. This is making sure that y'all can get the news every day and also hear what Zelensky has to say on top of that. So it's a good intermission. And usually Zelensky's speeches these days are getting pretty short. They're about like 2 minutes long, and they're so short that I really can't even get up from the computer to do anything. So I just kind of have to sit there most times and wait for the speech to be over. So tonight I wasn't really able to get up and go anywhere to try and get any kind of Tylenol or Advil or anything like that. And also throughout most of the rest of the stream, there literally is no time where I'm not talking. I'm just talking nonstop through the stream. Because that's how the show runs. And so then I don't really have a lot of time to get up then. Well, I have no time at all then to get up and do anything, because I'm having to talk the entire time. I would get a Tylenol. I'm definitely going to get one after the stream, because this is one of those headaches that I know even if I just tried to power through it, I'm going to go to sleep with a headache and I'm going to wake up with this headache, because it is a really, really bad one. And it was crazy how it hit. Like, it hit me like a truck. Like I said, hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and as soon as I said Enforcer, it was like the little hose dial, you know, like on a garden hose. It's like someone just started unscrewing that and letting the water out. That's what it felt like in my head, and it's just been throbbing ever since. It's really, really bad. And some people in the chat were like, oh, it's a tumor. No, it's not a tumor. It's just a headache. But beyond that, I thank you so much for the support, Destiny Edgington. I wish I could get a Tylenol, but right now, Tylenol is nothing but temptation to try and draw me away from the stream. But still, we're going to make sure to get through it. It might not be that much longer, to be honest. But still, I thank you so much once again for support, helping this channel to keep on running. I thank you for caring a lot, Destiny Edgington, wanting me to get some Tylenol. But nevertheless, sadly, that is not a luxury that I can afford right now. But still, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, in our next super chat we're addressing, it just came in. This one is from LSA Rocks, who puts in a $100 donation. The largest super chat of the night. Damn. And of course, huge shout out to LSA Rocks for always supporting the channel bigly. I'm telling you what, bigly. And LSA Rocks says, I seen a video today where Russian special forces are saying we are letting you push us back, making me think that they have a plan as they push toward the eastern border. And what are your thoughts?
And I thank you so much for the support, LSA Rocks. And I would have to say that is generally a Russian disinformation tactic that they pull right there, because they did that same thing 2 other times in major form. They did that in Kherson and they did that in Kharkiv. And I remember that very clearly, because a lot of people were saying the Ukrainians shouldn't advance very far. Like the Ukrainians had made it 10 miles in Kharkiv, and I think they had made it 5 miles in Kherson, and the public was already screaming, don't go further! The Russians are saying it's a trap! They're going to kill you! And the thing is that that's what the Russians want you to think, because they're in such a bad position at this point. They would want you to think that you're doing so well because it's a trap, and if you advance any further, they're really going to get you. The thing is that is not the case. The Russians are in a very bad condition in the northern area, and from what we understand, they don't really have a lot of reinforcements to pull in to help themselves out in a bad situation. So that is mostly a disinformation tactic by the Russians to try and make the Ukrainian armed forces believe that they're walking themselves right into a trap, instead of walking themselves right into an easy victory that they could achieve over the Russians. So I generally have to say, just based off of the Russians saying that time and time again before in the war, I generally wouldn't believe that. I would in fact take that as a good sign and encourage the push forward by the Ukrainians, because it probably means that the Russians are actually in a really bad position, and they're trying to bluff a position of strength, like they're deliberately giving up an area instead of giving it up because they're getting beaten so badly by Ukrainian forces. But that is a really good question. It seems as though, like, it would seem like that isn't that great of a question to some. They'd be like, well, duh, the Russians are lying. But really, that's not at all the case. The Russians may not be lying. The Russians may be telling the truth sometimes and saying this so that way when the Ukrainians move forward, they can make it look like there's some kind of a chess master. But the thing is that over the course of the war, we've started to see that clearly the Russians start making those kinds of messages in a form of a psychological warfare operation against the Ukrainians and against the Western public to try and get into their decision-making circles, which means, you know, kind of like the commander's idea of what he should be doing, and make those commanders in the Ukrainian armed forces go, yeah, we are advancing a little bit too much, and maybe, you know, and then they start to really analyze the new front lines that are going to be made in their next advances, and they go, well, you know, the Russians could have an entire reserve unit over here that we just don't see, and they could swing out like a trapdoor and encircle all of us if we advance forward. Maybe we need to stop right here instead of advancing further forward. And so that is actually an incredibly good question, because that is certainly a Russian psychological warfare tactic. And I thank you so much for asking that question, because I can actually explain something that the Russians have done time and time again over and over and over throughout the war. And a lot of people have really been wondering, is it true or not? And based off of the precedent that they've laid out so far, I would actually take that as a good sign that the Ukrainians are doing well and the Russians have truly spent everything that they have in that region. And so with that, thank you so much for the unbelievable, massive support, LSA Rocks. I cannot believe that you've been massively supporting the channel like this day after day. We are incredibly grateful and appreciative for it, because it is folks like you who help this channel to keep on running and help this channel to be possible for tens of thousands of people every single night. We are always greatly appreciative and so thankful for folks who support this channel, because no one has to. You only support it if you really want to. And I got to say, thank you so much once again for that unbelievable support. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well, and thank you once again for helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one is going to go to Jason Carpenter, who puts in a 10 and says, how much was Russia involved in aiding North Vietnam? And a great show, guys.
And I thank you so much for the support. And Russia was involved in aiding North Vietnam a little bit, but the Chinese were actually involved a little bit more, at least on a material side of things, because a lot of people would always go, oh yeah, the Vietnamese were using AKMs or AK-47s. What they were actually using most of the time was called a Type 59, if I'm correct. No, actually it's a Type. Hang on, let me type this in. Hang on. One second. I gotta go pull this up really quick, because for some reason... Okay, here we go. The Type 56. This is, by all means, an AK. Like, you look at that, that's clearly an AK-47 or an AKM. The thing is, though, is that it's a Type 56, which is actually the Chinese version of an AK. And most Vietnamese forces, including the Viet Cong or the NVA, which is the National Army of Vietnam... let's see, I think it was the NVA, or it was the... No, actually, no, it wasn't the NVA, it was the PAVN, the People's Army of Vietnam. They were mostly equipped with these Type 56 assault guns, or assault rifles, because the Chinese actually really supported the efforts of the Viet Cong. Because while the Chinese... Well, the way the Chinese view things during this time in history is a matter of national security interests. It doesn't really have a lot to do with encouraging the spread of communism around the globe. Really, funnily enough, the Soviet Union nor China were actually that interested in the spread of communism. They were more so interested in creating buffer zones in between them and Western aligned countries. So wherever they can make that happen, they usually would try. And of course, as a result, they would usually bring forward these little communist countries like North Korea. North Korea is truly a byproduct of the Chinese national security interest of wanting to create a security buffer, or kind of a buffer zone, in between their communist-run country and a capitalist-led or a dictatorial regime at the time, South Korea, which was supported by the United States. So North Korea ended up being a byproduct of a Chinese national security interest. The same as North Vietnam kind of did as well. And then later on, just the People's Republic of Vietnam. The reason why it exists is because the Chinese were massively invested in some kind of a security zone in between them and a U.S.-led Vietnam. And so they started to massively support the Vietnamese with training, equipment, material support, really anything they needed. But the Soviet Union also supported them as well. But the reason why the Soviet Union supported them was a different reason. They were just strictly supporting the North Vietnamese because they were fighting the United States, and therefore the enemy of an enemy is a friend. Even if the Soviet Union didn't really have any inherent interest in making sure that Vietnam would end up becoming a communist country, they just wanted to make sure to inflict damage on the United States in a longer lasting conflict. And they kind of did, because looking at the combined home front effort that the Soviet Union and China conducted on the U.S. populace, on top of the support that they provided to Vietnam, they did end up demoralizing the American population and changing a lot of the way that the American public views the war, well, really any conflict that America is in, and military service, even to this day. That's why people say, I'm not joining the military because I don't want to die for an oil company. That's kind of an extension of the mindset that was planted, or really the seeds that were planted because of the Vietnam War. But nevertheless, I hope that does address that incredibly well. Really good question. And also, one other thing that I just want to quickly point out is the Chinese also provided the Vietnamese with some tanks. And you would be very, very easy to mistake these for Soviet tanks. This is a Type 69. I believe this one specifically was an Iraqi service. It is. It was captured during Desert Storm. But this is a Type 69, and many of y'all will know this as a T-55. It is pretty much, for all intents and purposes, a T-55. It's just a license-built copy of it made by China. But the interesting thing, the one thing that usually gives away the only difference in between a Type 69 and a T-55 is the headlight orientation. Because the headlights on a Type 69 are actually on the external fenders of the tank. On a T-55, they're usually one set of headlights that is placed on the right side of the upper glacis of the main battle tank. So that's really the only visual difference that you can tell in between a Type 69 and a T-55. But nevertheless, the Chinese did provide a lot more support to Vietnam than, say, the Soviet Union did. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, and I thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to keep this channel on air. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And also, I see Nemesis said, did you know that the Blue Russian is an alcoholic drink? I remember you mentioning it a while back. I didn't know that. First of all, I'm not big in alcohol. I actually don't drink, so I don't know. But very interesting to hear. But I think they were talking about, like, they caught the blue. They kept saying the Russians had caught the blue, like when they were talking about those Russians getting drunk. So I don't know if, like, blue means like they're an alcoholic or something like that, but they kept saying like it was a disease, like, oh, they caught the blue. It's like, I don't know what that means, but maybe they were talking about an alcoholic cocktail. That could be it. But anyways, moving on to our next super chat, we have a $10 donation from Davo LBC once again, and he says, "Stop biatches." And I mean the best for you ever, or excuse me, best buds forever, and take a couple of Tylenol.
And I thank you so much for the support, Davo. And I will try and take a couple of Tylenol. Actually, I take Advil. Not that I'm sponsored by him or anything, but I take Advils. But I still thank you so much for the support. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. And sup, bitches! But beyond that, I gotta say, thank you so much once again for supporting and enjoying this channel and helping it to keep on running. And I wish I could get some Tylenol. Actually, the quicker I get off air, the quicker and closer I am to some kind of headache medicine. But still, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that well. And thank you once again for supporting this channel and helping you to keep on running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to be here right now. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and also real quick, we put up a headache poll right here. It says, which do you take when you get a major headache? 35% said other. Very interesting. 28% said Tylenol, while 25% said Advil, and 12% said aspirin. And for me personally, I don't know why I take it, but I've always had luck with ibuprofen, which is Advil. Tylenol, I was actually warned against that by a doctor. So I've been kind of sketched out by Tylenol, which is acetaminophen, or however you say it, some type of different one. And I've never taken aspirin for a headache. I don't know if you're supposed to or not, but I've never done it. And really, honestly, the 36% that said other, I'm curious what the other could be, because there's only a couple of different things. Man, they're on that other stuff. They're taking something, but I don't know what it is. It's just other. I'm not sure if I want to know. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say I'm always taking Advils. Tylenols, not so much. Aspirin, I have not ever taken an aspirin, I don't think. And others, I've never been on the perk 30 like ever in my life. So it is advil for me, but very interesting to see the different spread of people who take different kinds of stuff for a headache. But it will be advil for me in case y'all are wondering. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one is going to go to AMX10 Speedy Bang Bang, who puts in a 15 New Zealand, and says, does eastern Ukraine need to be liberated by a ground assault, or can we liberate it by other military means where enough economic and military pressure causes Russia just to leave?
I would certainly say that massive economic pressure inside of Russia would certainly get them to leave. I don't think a major strategic victory can be won anymore on the battlefield. I'm just believing that's a fair certainty at this point. So a war of attrition that would collapse Russia economically would most likely lead to a successful outcome. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And I thank you so much once again for support AMX10 Speedy Bang Bang and supporting this channel and helping to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to be here and keeping this channel possible. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Amber Clark, who puts in the 5 and says, do you think that NATO has troops stationed at the Suwalki Gap preparing for Russia to invade Estonia or Latvia, or is it too early?
We probably do not have troops in the Suwalki Gap at the moment. They're probably around the Suwalki Gap, but not directly in it. That would be my opinion. But I hope that does address that fairly well, because there's not really a lot more for me to sadly go into there, because my brain is hardly working right now. But they're probably around the area of Elk or Bialystok, or they may be inside of Suwalki a little bit, but it's not a large force. It's probably just a smaller garrison around the area. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. Thank you so much once again for support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Team of Jin, who puts in a 5, and thank you very much for the support. They said, great job, guys. Love the show, and keep up the great work, and thank you. They said F-16s by the end of July? That's a question mark, and what say you?
From what we know, they're going to be there probably by September at this point. So it's still a little ways away. I hate to say that, Timogen, because so many people are expecting the F-16s, but they just keep on pushing back the time that they're finally going to make it there. But I thank you so much for loving the show, and I thank you so much for wanting us to keep up the great work. We are going to try our hardest, and hopefully tomorrow when I come back on air, the headache will be gone and the stream will be back to normal. But still, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well, Timogen, and thank you for helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Larry Morrell, who puts in a 5 and says, thanks, guys, and remember, Spike.
Ike. But beyond that, thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. I love it. Love to see it. And I got to say, thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, Larry, and we will remember Spike. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Steve T, who puts in a 5 and says, if you follow the rail line from the Kerch Bridge, there is a tunnel under a road and viaduct bridge that may be more vulnerable and easy to hit.
Possibly so. I would follow that. Let's see here. Let's see if I can follow. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I guess you're talking about this one right here. It's possible that they could hit that. And then there's a tunnel right there. Tunnels would be pretty hard to actually hit and destroy. Now, a bridge, like a little bridge, like the one they have over this roadway here, that could be hit quite easily and probably end up taking a long amount of time to repair. But the tunnel would be a lot more difficult. Usually tunnels are pretty well insulated from attack, so it would take some kind of a bunker-busting munition, which an attackums isn't, to be able to break through and actually cause any significant damage. So I would generally have to say on that, attacking the tunnel might not be that great of an idea, but this little bridge here, now that is a target and should be looked at possibly hitting, because it's probably outside of the air defense perimeter or right on its very edge. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. Thank you so much for throwing in a really cool point, though, Steve T. I never even noticed that railroad bridge or that tunnel. And thank you so much once again for supporting this channel and helping us to keep this thing running. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one is going to go to Larry Morrill once again, who puts in a 5 and said, what is the difference between addressing @Enforcer Matt versus @TheEnforcer in the live chat? And the difference is, Larry, that it highlights in orange when you address it to me, which means I can see the question in the live chat and then add it to the spreadsheet. The enforcer actually does not touch the spreadsheet. Sometimes he looks at it, but he actually doesn't touch the spreadsheet at all. So whenever a question gets added to it, it has to be added by me. So that's why it has to be highlighted in orange and addressed to the Enforcer Matt handle. But I hope that addresses it. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say the same thing, but if you at me, if you at the Enforcer in the live chat, it makes it much easier for me to see what y'all are saying. If y'all want to say it directly to me, because some people will say something and they mean it to go to me, but I don't see it because there was a lot of chats coming in every minute, and I can't tell that that's actually addressed to me. I always think that it's probably addressed to someone else. But if I see that bright orange little outline around my name and it says at the Enforcer, then it makes it a lot easier for me to single out who's talking to me and then read them to be able to make sure that I know what y'all are talking about specifically to me. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And I thank you so much once again for the support, Larry, and helping this channel to keep on running. And thank you for your 10th super chat ever. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. And we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Uncovered Cube, who puts in a 2 and says, thanks for all you do, and LSA.
And LSA! And thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And thank you for just really enjoying this channel and making it possible. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. Thank you so much once again. And we are on to the next one.
All right, and that was actually our last super chat to address. So with that, thank you all once again for donating and keeping us running with the work. We appreciate it very much. And we're now moving on to our live chat questions, and up first, we've got the Morse code decoders of the stream. We have Cliff Simonson, Mark Hodges, Earl Bernew, Paul Schultz, Kevin J, Rumpelstiltskin, and David Millsaps. They said, the Morse for tonight from LSA Signal Corps is Russian forces keep getting pushed back little by little at Vovchansk. And they should just leave. And LLT, LSA, and great job, guys.
And that is the sound of money. And y'all got that dead on the nail. That was the Morse code message. And I got to congratulate y'all for getting that right. That is pretty impressive to see that y'all continue to get that Morse code message correct day and day again, time and time again. 864 days, and y'all are still getting that thing dead on the nail. And I got to congratulate y'all for that because that is really impressive. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. Thank you so much once again to all of our Morse code decoders. And with that, we're now moving on into the live chats. But before we do, I quickly have to say, because of the massive headache that I'm having, and I really want to get some headache medicine, we're going to be addressing 5 live chats, and then we're going to be rounding out tonight's stream. And so with that, Matthew, what do we got?
So the first one here goes to JR Does Stuff. And he says, I heard something the other day that the U.S. is putting together American contractors to fight in Ukraine. And do we know what the latest is on this? And also, real quick, I actually heard about that myself, so I can tell you a little bit about it. I heard that America was thinking about lifting the ban on American contractors actually going to Ukraine. I didn't hear they were putting together groups of contractors, because contractors act pretty much alone. They're not at the behest of the United States typically unless they're hired by the U.S., so I think what you heard was basically the ban being lifted. Perhaps. We really don't know that for a certainty yet, but it's a possibility. But Enforcer, what say you?
That's the exact same thing I heard as well. So I think Matthew covered that fairly on the nail. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. And we are on to the 4th to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Boss. And he says, do you think that Putin actually believes he is winning, and that he believes he can win the war by dragging it out until Europe and the West give up on Ukraine?
I don't believe he actually thinks he's winning, because the acts that the Russian army are taking in some instances, like trying to destroy Ukrainian critical infrastructure, is showing acts of desperation, where they're attempting to try and win the war of attrition against Ukraine before Ukraine wins it against them. So I would have to say that, in my personal opinion, I have a feeling that Putin probably knows that it's not going well for Russia, and they're trying every desperate move they can to try and eke out some sort of a victory in some form, at least in my opinion. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one, the 3rd to last one of the night.
All right, this one's actually a super chat. This one's from A-Star, who puts in a $5 donation. And says, Pedialyte, electrolytes help with headaches. And when choosing your electrolytes, be careful about salt if you have blood pressure issues. I'll be honest with you, A-Star, I've had Pedialyte before. That stuff is honestly nasty as hell to me. The flavor is not that good. I know it's like to help with electrolytes, but I think I'd rather have like a Gatorade or something like that, because that Pedialyte just tasted rancid to me, honestly. It doesn't taste good. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'll have to look into that. I have never had a Pedialyte before. I don't know if they're good or bad, and I always like to give things a shot before I pass judgment, so I'll actually have to give it a shot. But thank you for the support, A-Star, and giving some helpful little tips and tricks on the headache stuff. Usually what I do for headaches is I just power through them, get Advil, or I sleep. Usually because I get them later on at night, probably during a stream or a little after a stream. But still, I thank you so much for the support, A-Star. I thank you for caring a lot and giving some advice too. That means a lot, and that's incredibly kind of you. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Quantum Fighter, who says, is there/will there ever be a chance for the AFU to break the stalemate on the Eastern Front and go on the offense? If this was World War I, how would they create a breakthrough? Opsik Ak.
That's a good question. I would have to be entirely honest. Just speaking about this in my own personal opinion, I just don't think there's a way that Ukraine can do it. I don't think there's a way that Russia can do it against Ukraine. They are really stuck where they are right now. And a lot of people are going to be like, oh, come on, man. Like, you know, the Ukrainian army is better than that. They're really good. Yes, they are. But they're going up against massive numbers. I mean, like, when we talk about it right now, the Russians do have larger numbers on the front lines right now than Ukraine does, even at this point in the war. Even with the amount of losses they take, they still have a larger number. And that means that while Ukrainian forces are far higher quality than the Russians just have larger numbers, and therefore they offset the quality difference with just sheer numbers alone. And so, going off of that, it's a net neutral. There's really no positive for Ukraine. There's no negative. They're pretty much flat on the board against the Russians. And so, going off of that, I don't really think there's a way for them to develop a way to conduct a breakthrough at this point. I think it's just better for the Ukrainian army to focus on a defensive and really just hold the ground that they have and focus on attriting the Russians until they have to move out of the war. That's what I would say would be a very solid move at this point, because otherwise there's not really a lot of other things that I can think of right now. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well, at least the best I can in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who is the lucky last person who threw in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is Nemesis, who says, apparently Ukraine took out a naughty Korean train carrying ammunition, and it went with a big bang. And I think it was an independent paper online, so I'm not sure how accurate it was, but what can you tell us?
I have not heard of a North Korean train being blown up. I think that is falling amongst the rest of the stories of trains getting blown up, stolen, and generally harassed in Ukraine. I hate to say that because I would love for one of those stories to be true, but I have never gotten any actual proof or evidence of any of those stories being true. And so let me go through all the stories I've heard recently over like the past week of trains. One train was stolen with a whole S-400 on board by the Ukrainian Navy SEALs and apparently was brought back to Ukraine. Another one was stolen with a couple of Su-57s on board, which also somehow made it back into Ukraine. Then there was a train that got blown up that was carrying like an entire Russian brigade or something like that. And then there was another train that was blown up that was carrying Kim Jong-un himself or something along those lines, or some kind of a high-level diplomat or something. And now this story of a North Korean train getting blown up carrying a whole bunch of stuff. There's a lot of train stories going around, and I never get any validity to them at all beyond the story itself. Like, there's no picture or video evidence to ever prove that these trains were derailed or destroyed or anything along those lines. So I would have to say that in my opinion, I wouldn't believe the story at the moment. We're getting so many train stories like that, it's really hard to see that there is any kind of a truth or validity to any of them. So we're going to be trying to look around a little bit more and try and find out if one of these stories is true, but right now it doesn't seem like any of them are. And so with that, I hope that does address it well. And also Ing X said, how do you steal a train? That's exactly what I'm saying. Like, how do you steal a train and get away with that? It's not exactly like it's something hidden or super secret. I mean, it's a train, you know, like on a railroad. Like, it's not like the Ukrainian special forces can just steal one and then it just disappears for the Russians. I mean, they know where the train was when it was stolen, and they know where it's going, because it's not like it's going to go off-road or anything. You know, it's a train. Like, that's why I don't get those stories. But still, I would have to say, for the most part, I don't believe that one's true. I think it goes with the rest of the train stories right now, which seem to be untrue and unverified from what we can tell. But with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well, and we've reached the end of tonight's stream, very early on compared to our normal ending. But I gotta say, We are entirely honored to cover this news for each and every one of y'all. Terribly sorry that I sound really tired. Terribly sorry that I don't have a really upbeat tone. And that I've been a little bit touchy tonight. Really sorry about that. Headaches are really tough to deal with, especially when they're this bad. Because I'm just sitting here right now trying to like almost close my eyes while I talk. It's pretty rough. But I still thank you all so much once again for watching. Tomorrow it will be a lot better. The headache will be over. We'll be back to covering news just as normal. And I believe that I'm also supposed to be making the short war summary for tomorrow if we have enough news to make one. And so with that, I thank you all so much once again for watching. Good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, and Slava Ukraini, and long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die.
And good night, folks. And once again, like the Enforcer said, a huge shout out to everybody for another great stream. And be sure to join us tomorrow night for the fundraiser stream. It's going to be Sunday night. And of course, it's always a big night on Sunday. So be sure to join us then as well. And also, be sure to check out the merch on officialenforcerstore.com. The Bot Be Gone shirts. They're beautiful. I'm telling you, they're beautiful. Never seen a better t-shirt. It's great. So go check that out, and we appreciate that very much as well. And with that, Slava Ukraine, Herom Slava. We'll see you all tomorrow, maybe midday as well. And with that, good night.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.